Chapter 1 Su Chi. Bang! Lu Yishou pushed open the door to the interrogation room directly. Inside sat a young man in his early 20s. His gaze sharpened. Those who often commit murder know that crime and appearance are hardly related. Yet he still found it hard to imagine that the good-looking young man before him could commit such a cruel and inhumane act. A month ago, a family annihilation had taken place in Linjiang City, leaving a family of 5 dead at home, all valuables cleanly picked. The murderer had not been found. But today, the perpetrator was suddenly apprehended. At this moment, 2 investigators saw Lu Yishou enter and were about to get up. Lu Yishou raised his hand to signal them to stay put. His gaze coolly fixed on the young man as he interrogated him word by word. 2 months ago in the family annihilation, all 5 members were killed with precise cuts, and there were no fingerprints or footprints in the house, nor did the community's surveillance capture anything but a fleeting shadow. I've been on the trail of this case, and I've found quite a few clues. He watched the young man with a deterring gaze. You're definitely not an ordinary criminal, but a dangerous recidivist skilled in knife work, with ample criminal experience, and thoroughly premeditated and planned in action. The young man faced the interrogation with a slight smile. Lu Yishou's expression slightly darkened, impressed by his composure in the face of danger. That? An investigative officer, cautious, interrupted him. Chief, you've got the wrong person. This young man isn't the criminal. He's the enthusiastic citizen who subdued the perpetrator. Lu Yishou's expression stiffened, his aura quickly fading. Silent for a while, then he asked, Where is the criminal then? Suffering from 12 fractures all over his body, currently undergoing emergency treatment in the hospital. Lu Yishou stood outside a hospital's single-occupancy room, looking through the glass at the murderer wrapped in bandages, still unconscious. Tragic. Apparently, the perpetrator had soiled himself when he was put into the ambulance. Beep, beep, beep. His phone rang, delivering him a file. It was the young man's information. He glanced at it. Su Chi, 21 years old, an orphan, hasn't graduated yet. Experience. Lu Yishou suddenly paused. He realized that this young man had a broad range of interests. He had participated in various city competitions such as archery, combat sports, rock climbing, swimming, was a member of extreme sports clubs, and had won multiple community mahjong and chess competitions. It wasn't until Lu Yishou finished scanning this information that he looked up thoughtfully. It seems the statements hold no issues. The hand was slightly heavy, but the guy's got something. Bold yet meticulous, rich in experience, painstaking in his actions. Such a person might actually be a good fit for the investigation bureau. At that moment, a call suddenly came through on his phone, and a somewhat hesitant voice spoke. Chief, I think I found some more information about that young man. Lu Yishou sensed something off in the caller's tone. He filed a leave of absence from school a month ago, dropped out of the club, and stopped participating in any activities. Then, the voice on the phone hesitated, with an air of disbelief. He began to do some strange things. Strange? Lu Yishou raised an eyebrow. In his years busting illegal activities, he'd seen men dressed as women. How strange could this be? He said in a stern voice. Go on. There was a complaint before. Someone reported their cat went out to play and came back with its fur shaved off its forehead, and his figure was caught on camera. Might just dislike cats. Not strange. He sneaked into the school's locked music room late at night and played several pieces. Could be nostalgia for the school. The behavior is not encouraged, but understandable. After Ghost House closed, he moved the body out of a coffin and laid there himself for the night. Lu Yishou eventually couldn't hold back, asking, Where did you get all this from? From the complaint calls we received before. We didn't prioritize it because it seemed trivial. Lu Yishou, retracting his previous thoughts. Such a guy definitely shouldn't be recruited into the investigation bureau. Who knows what kind of influence he might bring. Suddenly, Lu Yishou heard footsteps approaching. He turned to see two strangers. Noticing the distinct air about them, he asked with a hint of caution, "Who might you be?" The middle-aged man took out his ID. "Linjiang City Investigation Bureau Action Team Chief Lu Isho, right? You've worked hard. From now on, we'll take over the person in the hospital room." Lu Isho recognized the emblem on the ID card, belonging to a secretive department of the Investigation Bureau. A group of people who seldom appeared within the bureau and were rarely seen by others. Rumors were they didn't work yet, they still drew salaries, truly enviable. The middle-aged man's gaze shifted to the dreadful sight of the murderer in the hospital room, clicking his tongue in disapproval. "So, you took the law into your own hands?" It's a long story. I'll give you the written record later," Lu Isho coughed, voicing his doubts. "But why? Why are you guys taking over this criminal?" "Confidential. Not at liberty to disclose." The reason this branch was so mysterious was because its work was strictly confidential. However, the middle-aged man pushed the door to the hospital room and then suddenly turned around. "You should find out soon." Right at this moment, at the side of the street with the traffic lights, Su Chi looked at the wary gaze of the person across from him, trying to find the right tone to start. "First, I need to clarify one thing. I'm not a pervert. There's a reason for this. Second, I don't have any peculiar fetishes either." Finally, Su Chi paused for a moment before looking at the businesswoman in professional attire on the electric scooter. "Would you sell me the stockings you're wearing on your feet?" The office lady's face changed color slightly. "Pfft, pervert. Creep." As she spoke, she sped away. Su Chi watched the scooter disappearing into the distance. See, the world is so cold and insincere. Honest communication earns no trust. A month before, he had developed a problem with his eyes. He started seeing punctuation marks. At first, he saw a question mark above a cat's head. Out of curiosity, when he made contact, he saw a message from the inner thoughts of the kitten. "What is this stupid servant staring at?" Despite being insulted, Su Chi wasn't angry and generously went to buy a pair of scissors to give it a haircut. From then on, Su Chi knew he had acquired a special ability, which he tested numerous times in search of understanding. Currently, it was divided into two types: question marks and exclamation points. After triggering a question mark, you could obtain some related information. Exclamation point required completing a specific action beforehand. Then you would obtain a hidden special item. It was like finding an Easter egg in a game, jumping along the wall in the sword battle room to make a machine gun fall, cutting off your own meridians 100 times in a martial arts online game to get an immortal body, with one palm not only breaking the martial arts alliance leader but also crashing the server. Of course, for the sake of testing his ability, he had done all these things, which resulted in his accounts being banned for cheating. Games can be illogical, after all, but reality is different. He laid down as a corpse in Ghost House, played the piano at night school, all to trigger Easter eggs, and what he got were only a finger bone and a sheet of music. Currently, I have no clue what they're for. Su Chi crossed the street, and although it was already evening, the commercial center was even busier. With more people, the frequency of question marks also increased. The beef pancake shop didn't use real beef, but synthetic duck meat instead. The roadside vending machine was broken. Put in 1 yuan and 2 bottles of drink would fall out. There was a man and a woman in the coffee shop on a blind date. The woman said she was too busy at work to date, but Su Chi could see the number 55 over her head. It can only be said that the question marks are relative. When you see a question mark, your own heart places one there as well. At this moment, the crowd suddenly buzzed with commotion. People raised their heads, pointing and saying with a hint of fear, "What is that?" On the huge screen outside a commercial building, an image of a ghost mask appeared. It occupied the entire screen, opening its crimson eyes as if watching everyone. You couldn't make out the face, but you could feel it sneering darkly. TSSS. It extended several thin, pale fingers, and blood-red words were shakily written across the screen. The grating sound of the writing sent shivers down people's spines. Do you wish to understand the true meaning of life? Such a strong sense of déjà vu. Everyone shuddered involuntarily, feeling a chilling sensation rising from deep within their hearts. Could it be that something big was about to happen? Then the screen suddenly flickered. The ghost mask chuckled lowly a few times before vanishing in the flickering light. Messages began to scroll one after another. Abyssal Paradise is going into public beta tomorrow. Developed by Magic Cube Company. This is a brand new virtual reality game in a world full of endless mysteries. Scared for nothing. Turns out it's just an ad. So it's nothing. No, I do have a problem. Where can I buy pants around here? In the midst of the noisy crowd, Su-Chi stood rooted to the spot. Just as the ghost mask appeared, question marks and exclamation points filled the screen in utterly immeasurable quantities. It was like a vast tsunami pounding at his trigeminal nerve, as if it sought to drown him. Chapter 2. Abyssal Paradise. Activate. Su-Chi returned home and cooked a bowl of noodles. He didn't like soup noodles. The essence of noodles lay in dry mixing, where each strand could be fully coated in savory meat sauce, blending into the rich flavor. He brought it to his computer screen. He began browsing the official forum of Abyssal Paradise. It had to be said, the game was incredibly popular, though not yet in open beta. The number of followers had already exceeded 3 million. Some complained about Magic Cube Company on the forum, saying it was heartless to sell the game cabin and game as a bundle, and furthermore, the cabin could only play Abyssal Paradise, which was quite expensive compared to others. But defenders quickly emerged. How is it expensive? Stop talking nonsense. Sometimes you should look for the reasons within yourself. Love it or leave it. Those who don't play Abyss are doomed to a failed life. People are acting like filial sons before the game's even released. Su-Chi skipped over those pointless, jumbled, and crazed messages. He read some valuable content, summarized as follows. Abyssal Paradise had a 6-month confidential test phase with data deletion. Many of the testers posted on the forum, seemingly forming factions to attract naive new players. Additionally, the game's structure was extremely large. According to Magic Cube Company insiders, the game boasted an unlimited number of instance worlds for players to explore, offering infinite possibilities. Also, the cheats that other games detested would never appear in Abyssal Paradise. Is that so? Zero cheats? It seems I must play then, as I hate cheaters the most. On the morning of the open beta, Su-Chi got up early for a run, had a bath and breakfast. Then he lay down in the game cabin, refreshed and ready to enter the game. He tapped the narrow walls of the cabin and watched the automatic door close. The designer of this game cabin must have worked in funerals before. This feels no different from lying in a coffin at Ghost House. Neural connection in progress. Connection successful. Welcome, player number 985211, for using our company's product. Please be aware, during gameplay, you may experience nausea, dizziness, or other discomfort, as well as potential negative emotional effects. Players are expected to bear the consequences. If any discomfort arises, please cease gameplay immediately and seek medical help promptly. Have a pleasant game. After a brief moment of distraction, Su-Chi found himself in a dark room, where beyond the system's faint glowing messages, there was nothing but deep darkness. Weird and mixed noises came from outside the room. Monsters howling, ghostly laughter. Listening to the bizarre sounds continuously emerging from outside, he mused, personal login space made like this? Is it to make players feel immersed, or just to create a scary atmosphere? Ordinary people might indeed panic, staying motionless in the well-lit area. But Su-Chi was already making his way through the darkness, trying to open the door to find out what lay beyond. The door handle, however, would not turn. Instead, a message popped up in front of him. This area is not yet available. He could only knock on the door. Enough with the effects. It's too loud. It was unclear whether the game had heard Su-Chi's words, or if it was just the game's design, but the noises outside the room quickly faded away. Please enter your in-game username now. Su-Chi hadn't considered using his real name. After a moment of thought, he made up his mind. Is the username confirmed as Su Buxian? Confirmation successful. Player Su Buxian, do you wish to immediately enter the single-player instance? Upon entering the instance, character panel will be unlocked. Yes. The next moment, the system's light vanished, and the room fell into complete darkness. A faint sobbing sound rose from the darkness. It seemed far away, yet suddenly it was close to his ear, a hoarse voice as if from a scorched throat. Welcome to the abyss. After a brief wait, the darkness receded like a tide. Su-Chi, with a dark expression, touched his ear. If you're going to scare someone, why get so close? And why do I feel like I've been licked? He looked up. The original login space had transformed into a wooden cabin. The cabin was dim, with rays of sunset seeping through the gaps of the ill-fitted wooden door, casting light upon the somewhat dirty floor. Dirty and messy? Su-Chi looked down at his feet, noticing what appeared to be dried liquid on the floor, flies buzzing chaotically inside the room, and his nose quickly caught a whiff of an indescribable odor. Before he could get a clear view of the cabin's interior, his vision blurred suddenly as the game's introductory CG screen began to slowly emerge, and a detached voice sounded in his ear. You had a flat tire and were stranded on the desolate roadside, and, with no other options, you accepted an invitation from a passing local to stay at their home. Their home is in a secluded small town nearby. The town doesn't have many residents, but each one you meet is overly enthusiastic. You decide to stay the night and deal with your car the next day. Only, the vague traces you've incidentally discovered make you uneasy. The CG showed the scenes he had passed on the way, thorny shrubs, a church used for prayers, and enthusiastic smiles on everyone's faces. The next moment, the mission prompt appeared. Mission: escape the town or survive for 3 hours. As the images slowly faded, Su-Chi finally had a moment to survey the cabin with his gaze. Apart from a bed, there wasn't much inside the cabin. It seemed to be temporary lodging arranged for visitors, but obviously, he wasn't the only outsider who had come here. Su-Chi touched the dried liquid on the ground and brought it to his nose to sniff. The smell of disinfectant, but there's more. There was also a faint stench that even disinfectant couldn't mask. Although he looked around the cabin, he didn't see anything.
Suddenly, Sui's gaze froze.
A small question mark was quietly sitting in a corner by the bedside. Looks like you can see them in this game, too. After approaching, he saw the message. This plank is loose. Su-Chi pried the plank open, his eyebrows arching at the spine-chilling sight. Beneath was a hollow space filled with skeletons, a few bodies that hadn't fully decomposed, their flesh hanging more densely than the pork ribs sold at the butcher's by the entrance of his residential complex. He pinched his nose, almost knocked over by the stench as he opened it. So, it means all the outsiders who were invited here were killed. Su-Chi, with sharp eyes, spotted a plastic bag in the chest cavity of one of the corpses and reached out to pull it out. The bag was covered in blood. Upon opening it, he found a small voice recorder and an ID badge inside. It seems this was a journalist, who also stumbled into this place. Su-Chi skipped the previous voice entries and went straight to the last day. A man's voice soon came from the voice recorder. 6:26 p.m. My luck couldn't be worse. My car broke down, and reluctantly I had to seek shelter in this remote little town. But the townspeople are very hospitable, even bringing me dinner, which was delicious. 7 p.m., just as I was about to leave the house, the enthusiastic neighboring maid, Mary, it seemed like she was waiting for me, voluntarily showed me around, and I noticed that even though the town has less than 50 residents, there's a church with decorative patterns that felt strangely familiar, but I couldn't place them. 7:40 p.m., as the sun has set, it seems everyone in the town goes to the church for prayers at this time. Although it's a bit odd, it is their custom. 7:47 p.m. I can no longer stand the smell of dead mice in the cabin. Can't they detect it? I wanted to mention it, But seeing their warm hospitality, I couldn't bring myself to complain. I'll clean it up myself. The voice did not hang up. It was apparent he had found the source of the stench and was creaking the floorboards. Su-Chi knew what would happen next. After opening it, snap! The recorder had a clear sound of being dropped, followed by his panicked, trembling voice. God! What the hell is this? This damn thing? The voice cut off there. Clearly, he had discovered the skeleton storage below. Su-Chi shifted his gaze to the last voice recording, dated 8 p.m. The voice recorder emitted a shaky voice, clearly discernible despair and fear throughout, a stark contrast to the beginning. Why are there so many bodies here? Could it be? I remember now the patterns. Damn it! Everyone here is a wicked believer, and each outsider is sacrificed to the demon. The man tried to flee, footsteps frantic, but they suddenly halted, as if he saw something terrifying outside the window. They have finished their prayers and are all standing outside the cabin with torches. His voice grew quieter, a feeble and trembling sound of ultimate despair. I'm already trapped. Crack! The sound of the cabin door being opened came from the recorder. At the same time, Su-Chi heard the same sound from the door behind him. Click! Chapter 3. Everyone in town has a unique skill. The woman at the door, dressed as a housemaid, pushed it open with a smile, holding a dinner plate with an exquisite dinner on it. Esteemed guest, here is your dinner. You must be famished, she said. Su-Chi had already put down the plank the moment the door opened and then stood up calmly to meet her. He remarked politely, "Thank you." Then he glanced at the dinner, frowning. Wait a minute. Why isn't there any coriander? I love eating coriander. The smile on the housemaid's face stiffened. The outsiders she usually encountered would sincerely thank her, showing a gentlemanly demeanor as they accepted their meal and then praised its deliciousness. Who would ask her about the absence of coriander? I can't eat without coriander. She was silent for a moment, then compromised. I'm sorry, if you really want it, I'll make it again. But Su-Chi waved her off. Never mind. I'm already too hungry. Just give it to me. The housemaid clenched her fist and handed it over. Su-Chi took the dinner plate and said, By the way, after I finish eating, I'd like to see if there's a place in town that can fix a flat tire. Could you show me around? Of course, guest. The housemaid bowed. I'll wait outside for you, so I won't disturb your meal now. As she was about to turn around and leave. Oh, right. Su-Chi stopped her, asking, What's your name? Ma. Never mind. I'm not interested. Su-Chi slammed the cabin door shut. Mary, the housemaid, had bloodshot eyes as she clenched her fingers until veins showed. Damn it, if you're not interested then why ask at all? Rude bastard. Once the time comes, I'll tear you into pieces. Whoosh. Su-Chi immediately dumped the dinner into the hollow space beneath the plank. The dinner might or might not have been tampered with, but it was best not to eat it. He leaned back on the bed and thought to himself, It seems my guess wasn't wrong. I'm still safe as long as I don't have to pray at the church. Of course, the condition is that I can't run away or show any flaws and must appear completely harmless. While pretending to eat, Su-Chi opened his character interface.
ID. Subuxian.
Level 1. Vitality 100%. Physical strength 100. Moving, fighting, and using skills consume physical strength, which increases proportionally with the physical strength attribute. Strength 10. Movement technique 10. Physical strength 10. Spiritual power 10. Item slot not opened. Skill bar locked. Note: non-fatal injuries first deduct physical strength. Fatal injuries can directly reduce vitality. If vitality falls below 10, a severe injury buff is applied, continuously deducting physical strength until vitality reaches 0, resulting in death. Note: spiritual skills are not included in the above. Running out of spiritual power results in death. After scanning over it, what caught his attention was the damage assessment. The term high offense, low defense came to mind. No matter how high the attack, if it's not fatal, physical strength is deducted first. But no matter how great the physical strength, a fatal injury could still lead to instant death. Encouraging players to fight and find enemies' weak spots. Having roughly understood, the interface slowly disappeared. After guessing that enough time had passed, he pushed the door open and stepped out, as Mary almost simultaneously emerged from the next cabin. Not only that, but there were also several seemingly inconspicuous gazes glancing over. Being watched like a hawk. Along the way, he also saw some skills on some of the small-town residents. The woodcutter is practicing chopping with an axe. The hunter is loading bullets into the hunting rifle. The butcher has been sharpening his cleaver for 20 minutes. Good grief, each one of them had a remarkable skill. Furthermore, upon closer inspection, each person also had their own panel, with their strength attribute at around 15. After a tour around, Su Chi finally saw the church. Just like in the recording, there were strange patterns on the pillar in the middle of the church. Looking closely, countless evil spirits with wings spread out were entwined upon it, and atop the pillar sat a sheep-head demon. This was the god worshipped by this small town. "Welcome, our guest." At this moment, a warm and husky voice sounded. An old man dressed in priest robes was standing on the street corner, staring at Su Chi with his round and pale eyes, a smile spreading across his face. "I am the priest of the church and also the mayor of this town." Su Chi also responded with a smile. "Mayor, I've had a flat tire and cannot drive. Does your town sell tire repair tools? It would be even better if you have gasoline." The old priest said with a smile on his white, wrinkled face. "Of course, but they're all in the storeroom, and the key holder won't be back until tomorrow." This was a lie. Su Chi, feeling resigned, said, "It looks like I can only stay here for the night." The old priest smiled. "May you have a pleasant night here." Although there was a smile on his lips, his eyes watched like a hunter viewing prey. Yes, prey. Su Chi had already realized that everyone here seemed to regard him as prey, sharpening their knives, preparing for the harvest. And at that moment, Su Chi also saw the question mark above the old priest's head. It read, "Likes the struggle and despair of the prey. Old Beaten." Su Chi also replied politely, "Thank you. I hope you all will also have a pleasant night." The old priest gently caressed the symbol of faith in his hand, a sheep head ring, and said meaningfully, "Yes, we certainly will." He looked towards the distant mountains. "Okay." The maid nodded. Su Chi offered no objections. Following the maid Mary, he headed towards the direction of the cabin. He also saw every resident of the small town, one by one, opening their doors and going out, their gazes fixated on him all the way. Against the darkening sunset, they looked somewhat excited and eerie. Su Chi acted as if he hadn't noticed and returned to the cabin. A town full of killing demons. A moment of inattention could lead to an instant death. However, there was also a chance. Next, everyone will enter the church for a 20-minute prayer. When the bell rings at the end, it will signify the start of their hunt. That means, within these 20 minutes, I have to choose whether to run like mad or to hide. The condition for completing the task is to escape the town or survive for 3 hours. Running like mad seemed like the best choice. Even if he couldn't get out, he could still hide in the woods. But in reality, running away was undoubtedly nightmare difficulty. It was already dark, and in the jungle there were all sorts of spikes and traps that appeared vaguely in the CG imagery. A person unfamiliar with the area daring to enter would likely die terribly. Moreover, there was someone guarding the jungle at the town's exit. Although he was extremely well hidden, Su Chi still caught a glimpse of his hovering question mark. No matter which option I choose, both are extremely dangerous. And time was pressing, after all. Every killing demon in the town would begin the hunt the moment the bell rang. But Su Chi looked toward the deep and serene town outside the cabin, where the atmosphere of terror permeated the streets. Perhaps I could try a third option. The next moment, Without any hesitation, Su Chi pushed open the door of the cabin and walked onto the empty streets. Chapter for this is so interesting, take me to play. All the villagers had already entered the church, meaning every home was now deserted. Su Chi, following the information he'd seen today, began to break into each house one by one. Soon, he found an axe at the woodcutter's house and slung it over his shoulder. Then, at the hunter's house, he found a hunting rifle, thoughtfully stocked with ammunition by the owner. Su Chi had no plans to flee or hide. He was arming himself with the enemy's resources. At last, in the butcher's home, Su Chi suddenly halted, his gaze slightly startled, for he saw not only the blood-stained butcher's knife, but also a mysterious symbol above it. Is there an unexpected find? It never appeared before. Upon triggering it, the information also revealed itself. If you can use it to peel an apple and keep the peel unbroken, perhaps you'll discover something. Sure enough, it's the style again. Su Chi shook his head, yet his expression wasn't surprised. Because the previous few exclamation triggers had also been like this, the prerequisite action somewhat abstract, puzzling, but rewarding upon completion, so he endured it. After a brief half-minute, he completed the prerequisite action. It must be said, the thing was indeed good at peeling apples, albeit a bit unnerving. The exclamation symbol flickered lightly, then gradually faded away. The next moment, the butcher's knife seemed to absorb a special aura, changing its appearance, and a panel popped up along with it. Name: 100-man slaughter blade. Type: equipment. Quality: ordinary, low quality, ordinary, excellent, perfect, immortal, legend. Function: when slashing, it can increase movement technique and strength by +15 each, also consuming more physical strength. Can be taken out of the instance, yes. Note: a knife that has killed too many people, filled with a terrible sinister energy. This was the first piece of equipment Su Chi could see the panel for. He didn't know whether it was because he had discovered its special property, triggering the equipment attribute, or because he did those things, changing from an ordinary item, directly creating it out of thin air. The former was still normal. The latter would be outright cheating. However, none of that was the most important thing at the moment. Su Chi tucked the blade into his belt and then strode to the storeroom door, sniffing the smell of gasoline inside. Right now, there was only one thing on his mind. He was about to embark on a massacre. At this very moment, the town's church was bustling, its doors tightly shut. The space inside wasn't large. Though it could accommodate nearly 50 people, they were all squeezed together. In the middle of the open space stood a column with the statue of a sheep's head on top, surrounded by patterns drawn in fresh blood. Clearly, this was a ceremony. Nearly 50 town residents were standing shoulder to shoulder in a circle. The old priest's voice echoed as he bowed his head and chanted the prayers, his tone filled with utmost devotion. Great true God, in this world, only we recognize your might. Please accept our unwaveringly loyal faith. When the bell tolls, we will offer up the sacrifice to you, completing the ritual with the flesh and blood of the desperate one. Torches burned around the column, and in their shadowy glow, the shadow of the sheep's head lengthened across the front wall of the church, reaching all the way to the hanging bell. All the residents of the small town had eyes bloodshot, their expressions brimming with immense excitement as they watched the scene unfold. Because they knew what was about to happen. The great true God would ring the bell, answering their prayers, and then the night's revelry would begin. Dang! The bell tolled, struck by a shadowy figure. The old priest watched everything, arms spread wide, his eyes lined with red veins. His devout expression appeared terrifying under the firelight as he said, "My friends, the true God's response has arrived, and today's prey seems quite promising. I hope you all enjoy yourselves." The hunters, butchers, and woodcutters raised their heads. Mary, the maid, was even more filled with madness and excitement. Yes, she had thought of 100 ways to deal with that guy, just hoping this rude and disrespectful man would last a little longer. Before Some guests would foolishly stay in the cabin, clueless even as the ritual started, and when tied to the post, still begged for mercy, ultimately being cut into pieces amidst desperate screams by each person. Some guests were smart and noticed something amiss early on, then attempted to escape, but most were wounded by traps in the jungle, and even if they barely made it into the jungle, that was just the beginning of their hunt. The prey that had lasted the longest before was an active-duty security guard, physically strong and experienced, having sensed the abnormality earlier than others. But what of it? Isn't he now just another corpse beneath that cabin? It's time. Let's see if our guest is still foolishly staying in the cabin, or is a bit smarter and has already started running. All the people stood up, their silhouettes elongated by the central firelight. They walked towards the church doors with horrifying expressions on their faces. Mary, the maid, couldn't wait to be at the front. She finally got to the moment when she could tear off her facade. She was already imagining the terrified and desperate look on that damned man's face. His constant pleading screams. Her grotesque face couldn't stop laughing maniacally. Then she reached out and pushed the door with force. Click! Mary's smile froze on her face. The door did not open as she wished, but remained utterly still. Others crowded in from behind but also felt a strong resistance. The old priest noticed this and squinted, asking, "What's the matter?" "The door won't open. There seems to be something blocking it from outside," someone muttered in confusion. "Let's push it open together." To hide the small town's biggest secret, even the windows in the church space were sealed, and the space was not large, so even if the residents all rushed forward, they could only cram against each other. It took quite some effort to crack open a small gap in the door. Through the door's slit, someone saw a blood-stained agricultural machine outside, topped with 3 heavy oil drums. It's the harvester from the storage room. Although it was a machine for harvesting crops, it had never cut grass. It was their prop for revelry, putting people inside to listen to the crunching sound of breaking bones as flesh and blood spewed out. Quite entertaining indeed. "I'll break it open." The butcher's body was all fat, and with a fierce bump, the door cracked open, and with a few more thrusts, the gap grew larger. The hunter looked out into the dark night. "This seems to be a very clever fellow. Tonight might be a bit interesting. Where has he run off to now? The town entrance or deep in the jungle?" The woodcutter was an old man with a face full of wrinkles, his beard somewhat grayed. He rolled up his sleeves, his voice hoarse. "No matter where he runs, it's no use. I will split him in half with my axe." "That would be so boring." "I'll do it," the butcher said breathlessly. He had already opened up enough space to pass through, his body fat jiggling as he squeezed through, trying to get out first. He snarled with a grin, while 100 cuts go down, ensuring he's not only still alive but also has the strength to scream. That's the most fun. The butcher hadn't finished speaking when he suddenly froze, his eyes fixed. Outside the church, a figure stood next to the harvester, holding an axe, with a somewhat familiar blade strapped to his waist and a hunting rifle on his back. And he was watching them. If it's that fun, count me in. Chapter 5 Emergency. Forced log-off. The butcher's entire body stiffened, his pudgy face trembling slightly. His first thought was, how dare this guy show up here? His next thought was, what was he going to do? Because he had seen Su Chi with a trace of a smile, the axe in his hand raised high in the dark night, gleaming with a cold light, and with a snap, he chopped off the rope tied to the harvester. The next moment, the 3 huge oil drums on top of the harvester toppled over as they lost balance. Not only did they knock the butcher back, whoosh, a large amount of liquid also poured out from the oil drums, drenching their bodies and the ground beneath their feet, and the unpleasant smell left the other killers stupefied. Is this gasoline? Maid Mary, ignoring the liquid on her body, lifted her head, her gaze fixed intently ahead. She let out a sharp sound from her throat. It's you, you bastard! All the killers looked towards that direction, their pupils glowing. The prey they had been talking about all this time hadn't been hiding or running at all. Instead, he had appeared right at the entrance of the church. Facing so many gazes, Su Chi seemed completely at ease. Leaning against the harvester, he looked at them and sighed slightly, speaking in an accusing tone. Leaving a guest aside while you lot are selfishly partying. Is this your hospitality? American bullying just doesn't cut it. Su Chi's figure in the darkness seemed quite lean as he watched a group of killers slipping and struggling, their eyes shining fiercely with the desire to pounce. He pulled out a matchstick, revealing a smile. But it's okay. I'll add a bit of atmosphere to the party. The matchstick dropped onto the gasoline. The raging fire shot up fiercely. Not only the front area of the church doused in gasoline, but the surroundings of the church quickly turned into a sea of fire. Ah, it's so hot. I'm going to burn to death. That damn beast. Kill him. Kill him. Screams and curses were incessant. The fire, as if wishing to burn everything away, enveloped everything around the church. However, this group of killers wasn't ordinary either, each one a madman. Some, ignoring the flames covering them, struggled to break through and leaped towards Su Chi. Snap! Su Chi swung his axe without hesitation, the axe's momentum heavy and sufficiently sharp, like cutting through a cake, cleaving the man in two. Physical strength -3, current 75. As mentioned earlier, all actions would consume physical strength, and moving items in the storehouse had already taken a toll. Bang! Bang! Su Chi also raised his hunting shotgun, aiming not at those burnt by the fire but at others behind, their faces filled with shock and rage. One shot, one head, no missed shots. The church was completely enveloped in flames, the walls splitting from the fire, and thick smoke billowing. Those at the forefront were already emitting the scorched smell of meat, and inside, people were falling or roaring, trying to escape through the smoke. And for those trying to break through the fire, Su Chi was merciless with his axe. Other than the hunter, the woodcutter, and the butcher, the rest had only ordinary human physiques, and their combat abilities weren't high once attacked by the great fire, barely managing to flail before getting their heads chopped off. The butcher had fallen, his body obese, sizzling with oil as it burned. The woodcutter had his head blown off by Su Chi's hunting shotgun at the first chance. And the hunter was vigilant, using the thick smoke and others' bodies as cover, while also finding the opportunity to leap over the flames on others' bodies. Bang! 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 Su Chi fired 3 consecutive shots, all dodged by the hunter. He frowned. The man's body movement attribute was somehow boosted by a temporary burst. D. The hunter towered over him, holding a spiked plank, his eyes terrifyingly ferocious as he charged at Su Chi. Su Chi unhesitatingly drew his butcher knife from his waist. In the instant the knife swung, Su Chi suddenly felt quicker, stronger, and he roughly knew the score. The chill of the butcher knife slashed through under the hunter's eyes filled with shock and doubt. He tried to block with what he had in his hand, but nothing could withstand the momentum of this knife. Blood sprayed out profusely. At the same time, Su Chi also saw the words, physical strength -12, current 43, the consumption startling him, but the effect it brought was quite remarkable. The hunter's head hit the ground before his body fell down with a thud. He slowly sheathed the butcher knife. It was powerful, but the physical strength it consumed was too much. For now, he had to rely on this axe. 10 minutes later, Su Chi stood among the embers, covered in blood, surrounded by charred bodies with severed limbs. The church completely collapsed, and the fire gradually dying down. Although I didn't follow the system's mission, killing them all should count as completing the instance, right? He was nearly at his limit now, with only 11 points of physical strength left, almost depleted. Excessive consumption of physical strength reflected in his physical state as fatigue. Once below 30%, he could regain strength with a bit of rest. The lower the physical strength, the faster the recovery, with the chance to restore up to 30% this way. After Su Chi's physical strength had recovered to 30, he gradually breathed evenly and walked towards the ruins holding his butcher knife. A question mark symbol appeared on the central sheep head pillar. He decided to explore it. Along the way, he saw the tragically dead Mary and couldn't help but lament. Next time. Remember to add coriander. Su Chi bypassed the burning ruins and walked straight to the open space in the middle. Strangely, even though the church had collapsed into this state, the open space remained undisturbed. His gaze turned to the ground. The old priest lay stiff on the ground, having slit his own throat with a ring and poured a large amount of blood onto the pattern around the sheep head column. The old man had committed suicide to complete the ritual. But was the ritual finished? Su Chi looked at the sheep head, its two long horns inscribed with various spells, its eyes tightly shut. Questions marks appeared with information. Abnormal God's Shrine. It is a terrifying entity from the abyss. It holds ancient and evil power. It is one of the sources of the despairing world's collapse. It is now somewhat angry. Its ritual was disrupted, but its power cannot penetrate this world, and it is currently observing you through the shrine with a trace of thought. One message after another appeared. No wonder I felt a chill at my back, Su Chi said, looking at the sheep head. So it was peeping? At that moment, Su Chi's eyebrows suddenly raised as a deep red exclamation point popped up on the sheep head. The darker the color, the more dangerous it indicated, and the higher the reward would be. If you kick its head around like a ball and juggle it 20 times without letting it touch the ground, you might receive an extremely astonishing reward. Su Chi, look at this. There's nothing normal about this behavior. At the same time, Su Chi also understood the malice in this message. Once he started kicking, he would stir up trouble with such a terrifying entity. But the reward seemed quite tempting. Should he give it a try? Moreover, the entity's power still couldn't infiltrate here. Su Chi hesitated for only a second, then decided the next moment. Damn it, just do it. After all, this instance was almost over, and once he left this world, it would be goodbye. Su Chi had indeed practiced ball games, not only basic juggling but also knee bumps, side kicks, and all kinds of fancy moves. And at this moment, a figure in the distance was staring blankly at this scene. He was the guard at the town's exit. After waiting a long time without any movement, he grew curious and hurried over. What he saw were all his companions turned into charred corpses. Most importantly, the horrifying god's sheep head that they revered was being kicked around like a ball by that young man. Su Chi's eyes naturally noticed this guy, but he didn't pay him any mind. All his attention was now on the sheep head before him, whose question mark was about to burst. This terrifying entity feels violated. Its rage is rising. It is beyond furious. It wants to kill you. It is trying to use the barriers between worlds to send its power over. It is being intercepted. It tries again. Intercepted again. It tries again. It's successful.
Sui.
This wasn't what was supposed to happen. All of a sudden, the entire night sky turned blood red. Thick clouds opened up an abyss-like giant hole. Wild winds came from all directions. The sheep head's apparition suddenly rose from the column, forming a colossal shadow of 1,000 meters. An overwhelming evil aura shot into the sky. The guard immediately rolled his eyes back and fainted on the spot. Meanwhile, Su Chi's vision became bloodshot. A cacophony of strange shrieks filled his ears, and his spiritual power dropped rapidly. This horror wasn't just for show. Just a mere apparition was enough to bring him to the brink of a mental collapse. At that moment, Su Chi hurriedly grabbed the eyeball that had fallen from the sheep head, which should be the so-called reward. But it was too late to see what attribute the eyeball had. A warning panel suddenly popped up. Instance number 6823765 has encountered a severe error, data anomaly, correcting, and forcibly expelling players from the instance. The next moment, everything went black before Su Chi's eyes. He was sent back to the login space. Chapter 6 Reward, Evil God's Eye. Su Chi stood in the landing space, taking a while to recover. As soon as that phantom appeared, his mind felt as if it had been filled with blood. His spirit completely relegated to a lightless abyss, as if it was about to explode any moment. Fortunately, he was forcibly logged out in the end. His 10 points of spiritual power only provided him with 0.5 seconds of clarity in front of the opponent. And that was just a phantom projected across realms by the opponent. He couldn't help but say, "What kind of worldview is this, where the worshipped evil spirits not only truly exist but also possess such terrifying power?" Suddenly, Su Qi felt that kicking the opponent's sheep head shrine around like a ball was not a wise decision. Wait a minute. Su Qi suddenly realized something. Where's my clearing reward? A system notification appeared before him. Due to anomalies in the instance, compensation is granted to player 985211 Su Buxian. You have earned triple the experience and game coins rewards for perfectly clearing this nightmare-level dungeon. Your level has been raised to 5, and you have earned 1 opportunity to draw a reward. Item slot has been opened. Skill bar has been unlocked. Su Qi leveled up 5 times and obtained 3,000 game coins. At the same time, he also gained 25 attribute points due to the level up. A nightmare-level dungeon? Is this how they bully new players right off the bat? However, this dungeon could also be described as fraught with danger. Both running away and hiding were of hell-level difficulty, especially since he was facing nearly 50 killing demons, each with a clear role and combat strength above an ordinary person. Su Qi's own choice had multiplied the difficulty several times. Of course, without the information from the question mark and his own combat skills, there was no way he could have managed this. A single mistake in the church leading to a loss of physical strength would have meant his end. After playing through this one dungeon, it's clear that physical strength is particularly important. It's not just the main cost of dungeon exploration and combat, but it also pertains to survival. Su Qi had few hesitations and directly allocated all 15 points to physical strength. He divided the remaining 5 points each between strength and movement technique. He didn't yet know the use of spiritual power, and even if he allocated all 25 points to it, he could at best only stand before the phantom for an extra second. And the next moment, Su Qi suddenly widened his eyes, seeing his spiritual power surge by 75 points to 85. How did this happen? He was somewhat surprised. He hadn't done anything, so why did his spiritual power increase? Su Qi suddenly thought of something and opened his item slot. There were only 5 slots corresponding to his levels. One slot contained the 100-man slaughter blade from the dungeon. In another slot, there was an eyeball covered in various runes. This panel appeared before Su Qi. Name: Evil God's Eye. Type: Quality. Function: passive. When you allocate points to other attributes, your spiritual power increases by 3 times the same amount of points. Note: you have deprived the evil god of some of its power through improper means, and this terrifying being has sworn that it must turn you to ashes. Su Qi. No wonder the opponent suddenly became so enraged at that time. He was puzzled, wondering why kicking its head like a ball would provoke such a reaction from a mighty evil god, even crossing realms to kill him. It was indeed a low blow. The reason lay here. However, Su Qi also understood how powerful this item was. He would have 3 times the attribute points than other players out of thin air. Even if it only affected the currently useless spiritual power, it was more than enough. Thinking this way, the cost of being targeted by a terrifying existence seemed bearable. Settling his thoughts here, Su Qi simply stopped thinking and walked to the middle of the room. After the upgrade, the login space had changed its appearance. Not only had it lights now, but there was also an extra box in the middle with a number on it. 1. It meant he could make a reward draw. Confirm the use of draw opportunity? Let's go. The box shook violently and, after a brief few seconds, it burst open. Inside was a sphere of light. Touching it, Su Qi saw the information. Name: Thunderbolt. Type: consumable skill, can be used 3 times. Function: can release a burst of very fast lightning forward within a 5-meter range, which will automatically explode upon touching any solid object or reaching 5 meters. Explosion radius 10 meters. Consumption: 120 physical strength. Usage conditions: movement technique must reach 12. Note: if you're not fast enough, be careful when using this. Su Qi remarked. What kind of kill 1,000 enemies at the cost of 800 of your own suicidal skill? No wonder it has requirements on movement technique. You're supposed to not outrun the range and die together, huh? He put it in his skill bar, which currently only had 2 slots. Although the skill's consumption was a bit scary, it seemed very powerful indeed. Just as Su Chi was getting ready for the second instance match, pop-up appeared. External interference detected. Would you like to exit the game or enter interference-resistant mode? Since this gaming pod offered a fully immersive gaming experience, it completely isolated all sounds from the real world but still detected external noises. Sounds exceeding a certain decibel level or someone opening the gaming pod would trigger an alert. Players could choose to continue or exit on their own. In the login space, however, the threshold for sound decibel detection was set lower. Alerts for phone rings, doorbells, and so on were provided, ensuring that players wouldn't miss important real-world events. A rather humanizing feature. Su Chi exited the game and upon opening his eyes, he heard a doorbell ring. He checked the time. It's 2 in the afternoon. It's been 2.5 hours since I entered the game. In Abyssal Paradise, if an instance lasted less than 5 hours, game time would sync with real time. Once the time inside an instance exceeded 5 hours, no matter how long you stayed, be it 10 days or half a month, only 5 hours would have passed in the real world once the instance ended. This applied to all players. It ensured a degree of synchronicity among all players. Su Chi got up, ruffled his somewhat messy hair, then went to the door and through the peephole saw 2 faces. One was Lu Yishuo, dressed in casual clothes, a man of impressive build despite being in his 30s, with well-muscled physique. The other was a young man with an unfamiliar face, who looked much younger than Lu Yishuo but stood in front of him as though he held a much higher status. It seemed the young man noticed Su Chi's gaze. The youth cracked a faint smile. He had faced many situations and could instantly notice prying eyes. "Hello, we are." Just as he was about to identify himself, Su Chi's voice came through. "Just leave the takeout at the door." The youth choked. "We're not takeout, we are." "Then it must be a delivery. Leave it at the door too." The young man's expression turned urgent just as he was about to continue explaining. Lu Yishuo placed a hand on the youth's shoulder, resignedly said, "He's messing with you." "The youth." Lu Yishuo shook his head slightly. Despite the young man's remarkable talent in another world, he seemed too naive, having never dealt before with idle people like Su Chi. He said, "I'm Lu Yishuo from the Lin Jiang Investigation Bureau. We've met before. Please open the door. We have some matters concerning your personal safety to discuss." Then he paused and added, "It's regarding your personal safety." Chapter 7. Do you believe in the supernatural? Sorry. I thought it was the delivery guy. Come in, have a seat." Su Chi warmly welcomed the 2 in. The young man walked through the door and sat somewhat preoccupied on the sofa beside. His gaze suddenly fixed on the gaming pod in the living room. He paused slightly and after exchanging a glance with Lu Yishuo, he spoke up. "You also play Abyssal Paradise. Of course, it's quite interesting." The young man said, "You must have played it at least once, right? Did you clear it? How was your score?" "Well, let's see. Cleared, well, not really cleared, and as for the score, I don't know." Su Chi pulled out 3 bottles of cola from the fridge and placed them in front of them. "But, is this a bit off topic? Does this have something to do with my personal safety?" Lu Yishuo extended his hand and pulled out a photo from his pocket and handed it over. "Let's cut to the chase. Take a look at this." On the photo was a tattoo pattern, a circle in the center with strange lines inside, like pairs of vertical pupils. Around the circle was a ring of flames. Su Chi squinted his eyes. "I feel like I've seen this somewhere. It's from that murderer, isn't it?" The young man spoke up at this point. This photo was taken from him. Su Chi did not deny it, but it was not only the murderer. He felt that the ritual the old priest performed in the chapel of the Instance Town had some similarities to this. He asked, "So what does this represent?" "It signifies some kind of evil belief. Now, take a look at this." Lu Yishuo seemed to know something but did not want to say too much. He reached out and pulled out his phone. keyed in the password, and opened a video. The video showed a solitary prison cell where a man in bandages lay with open eyes on the bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Su Qi recognized him. This was the murderer. He woke up the same day he left the hospital, but he became expressionless, as if deaf to anyone speaking to him. Then something strange occurred. I need to warn you. What you're about to see might disturb you. In the video, the man's eyes suddenly bulged out, and his body began to shake violently as if possessed by some force. The restraints around him were stretched out to create noticeable gaps, showing the immense strength at play. Then his trembling became more intense, and the guards surrounding him could barely hold him down. Eventually, he broke free of the restraints. The man leapt out of bed and crashed into the wall. There was a loud bang. The wall was coated in red. The video ended there. Lu Yishou had been watching Su Qi's expressions throughout. He noticed that the latter was not much affected by the bloody scene in the video. After the video, Su Qi spoke up curiously. What kind of fit is he having? This is not just a fit, the young man said lightly, his expression grave and serious as he looked at Su Qi intently. Do you believe in the supernatural? Su Qi didn't immediately answer. You tell me first. The young man began slowly. First, you should know that this world is not as simple as you imagine. Like what you just saw in the video, strange and foul forces can erode a person's mind through a terrifying invasive power. He continued, this force isn't a figment of imagination. It's filled with terrible evil. Though it may sound vague and hard to believe, this strangeness might come after you, especially since you already have a significant connection to this person. Su Qi pointed to the phone screen. You mean, I could end up like this too? Psychologically broken, then smashing into a wall? The young man nodded and then added, of course, you might also jump off a building or stab yourself. Usually depends on your first impulse after a breakdown. Su Qi's expression did not show fear or anxiety. He clicked his tongue lightly, quite intelligent. The young man looked puzzled. You aren't scared, or you don't believe it. I believe it. Why wouldn't I when 2 official agents from the Investigation Bureau came to my door personally? Su Qi glanced at the question mark above the young man's head, knowing his identity from the start. Member of Department 9, Su Linqiu. He said, but obviously, you're here not just to announce my impending demise. There must be other methods to handle this, right? The young man nodded. Naturally, after all, you're not the first ordinary person it's set its sights on. But, he paused for a moment, pointing at the game pod in the living room. It seems, however, you may have already found a solution. Su Qi froze, his expression changing slightly. Are you referring to Abyssal Paradise? This game is linked to the strange happenings in the real world. If this were true, then everything would be very different for Su Qi. You can think of it that way. If you want to break free from the bizarre, you'd better pay more attention to your spiritual attribute and also... The young man then abruptly changed the topic. Because you have shown a certain potential in previous cases, and it seems that you are entangled by the bizarre, so... The young man handed over a card. Like other ordinary people in the same situation, I'm offering you a chance. He paused and continued, the chance to see the other side of the world. Half an hour later, Su Linqiu and Lu Yishou had driven back to the Investigation Bureau. Lu Yishou lit a cigarette and said, I've almost made contact with 100 newcomers, but I feel this kid might actually be pretty good. Is that your definition of pretty good? Su Linqiu flipped through the file. Brother Lu, you don't even know anything about him, not even his performance in the game, and yet you're so positive about him? Lu Yishou laughed. Although I've only just been transferred to your department, I have a knack for sizing up people. It's a skill honed over many years, and anyway, I think he's capable. Su Linqiu shook his head. Among all this data we have, there are less than 10 people who have passed the difficult dungeon 3 times and scored at least 80 points on it. Brother Lu, you yourself have gone through 2 solo difficult dungeons, you know the level of difficulty. The difficult level alone has a 50% failure rate, not to mention the nightmare level. He paused. Anyway, we'll see later on. At that moment, the office door was pushed open. A set of steady footsteps walked in from the doorway. Su Linxiu, seeing who it was, quickly became more cautious. "Teacher, you're back." Lu Yishou also stood up from his seat. Ever since he left the hospital that day, he had submitted an application to the higher-ups, never expecting to be actually approved, and thus he had encountered a lot of unimaginable material in the past few days. The middle-aged man rubbed his tired eyes and asked, "Have you finished your tasks?" "Yes, we are currently observing some newcomers with potential," replied Su Linxiu. Suddenly pausing, he noticed that the middle-aged man's brows were furrowed, his expression not very relaxed. He asked, "Teacher, has something happened?" The middle-aged man's gaze was deep, his tone not too pleasant. "Just an hour ago, there was a major disturbance in paradise. That terrifying being in the abyss suddenly burst forth with terrifying strength without any warning. Although we don't know the reason and it has been stopped, it's clear that it has caused quite a bit of turmoil, affecting many people with insufficient spiritual power." Su Linxiu quickly asked, "Is it serious?" "It's under control now, but what's strange is that the target of that strength turned out to be instance 6823765, a very ordinary low-level world." "Why would it be targeted?" Su Linxiu was startled. "It's unclear. The data from that place has been cleared. Paradise cannot capture it. But the Black God Guard has already gone to investigate. There should be news soon." Su Linxiu could hardly contain himself. "I want to help. Although you're strong, your spiritual power isn't enough. That world has already sunk into the highest level of pollution. It's not possible," the middle-aged man said sternly, his face cold, promptly refusing. But, just as Su Linxiu was about to argue, confident he had a few tools that bolstered spiritual power, he was met with the middle-aged man's serious look and could only shamefacedly lower his head. Lu Yishou, observing the somewhat silent mood, broke the silence by voicing a question. "Is the spiritual attribute really that important? Although I've only experienced a few instances, it seems that none of them required the use of the spiritual attribute." Su Linxiu sat back down, turned on his tablet, and found an internal set of data. "Take a look at this. It's the success rate for each level of difficulty in Paradise after today's public test. Ordinary Dungeon. Success rate 78%. Difficult Dungeon. Success rate 50%. Nightmare Dungeon. Success rate 9%. Below was another line of data. All pollution-type dungeons. Success rate 1%. Lu Yishou froze for a moment. "What's a pollution-type dungeon?" "Pollution-type dungeons are directly linked to spiritual power." The middle-aged man seemed to see a distant future, saying, "Right now, although everyone overlooks it, but once they enter paradise, they'll understand the importance of the spiritual attribute." Chapter 8. Entering the new instance. It was already noon. Su Qi didn't immediately return to the gaming pod. After ordering takeout, he wandered around the house. That weird power spoke in mysteries. "I don't even know if my eyes can see anything." He wandered for a while and then discovered, to his surprise, everything in the room was normal. There was nothing special at all. Su Qi walked towards the bedroom and opened the cupboard. The finger bone and a piece of sheet music were still there, unchanged. Still in a state of chaos. Just as Su Qi was about to put these two items back into the cupboard, he suddenly paused and looked back at the gaming pod in the living room. Then a thought occurred to him. Half an hour later, after finishing lunch, Su Qi lay back in the gaming pod once again. Neural connection in progress. Connection successful. Welcome, player Su Buxian, to your personal space. You have now unlocked the matchmaking feature, allowing you to select dungeon modes and difficulty levels. Several selectable modules appeared in front of Su Qi's eyes.
Solo dungeon mode.
Note: experience and game coin earnings are 20% higher in solo dungeons compared to multiplayer dungeons. Multiplayer dungeon mode, unlocked at level 6. Note: multiplayer dungeons require players to explore together. Main quest progress is shared, and any player who kills a teammate will have their main quest blocked and cannot receive completion rewards. Both modes allowed for the selection of difficulty: ordinary, hard, nightmare. Su Chi noticed the nightmare option was grayed out and unselectable, with a tooltip saying, during matchmaking, there's a 1% chance of entering a nightmare-level dungeon, and the higher the average rating of the dungeon, the higher the probability. So it turns out this difficulty can only be encountered, not sought. My very first dungeon was a nightmare level. Can't tell if that's good or bad luck. After reading everything, Su Chi did not rush into a dungeon. He had another matter to verify. After opening the item slot, Su Chi's gaze flickered. Two familiar items had appeared in the item slot. Polluted finger bone, polluted sheet music. As expected, the two special items obtained from the real world could indeed be brought into Abyssal Paradise. Su Chi looked serious. What it implied was self-evident. It also proved what Su Linqiu had said, that Abyssal Paradise was not just a game. The other side he spoke of must be in this Abyssal Paradise. But these two items didn't seem to be equipment. They lacked attribute panels, and their purpose was unclear at the moment. He closed the item slot and began to make his selection. You have selected solo hard mode. Now matching. Match found. The experience and game coin rewards for solo mode were a bit higher, allowing players to adapt to gameplay and level up while accumulating basic attributes and advantages. After unlocking multiplayer mode, players could then avoid holding other people back. Soon, the lights in the login room flickered. The next moment, the room plunged into darkness, devoid of any trace of light. A low chuckle arose, its husky tone indistinguishable between male and female. Welcome to the abyss. The darkness in front of Su Chi slowly receded. By the time he opened his eyes, he found himself in an apartment room, where dim light shone on the not-so-clean floor, making the surrounding bed and table seem particularly cramped. And the strangest thing, the room had no windows. Or rather, the windows had been completely sealed off, not just clumsily welded shut with sheet metal, but even the cracks that revealed glass were painted over with black paint, blocking any view outside the window. This time, the CG image gave no explanation. It seems I have to explore on my own before I can trigger the main quest. Su Chi looked around the room, found nothing but a suitcase on the bed, and it appeared he had just moved in, not even having a chance to clean up. Click! After he opened the suitcase, aside from some clothes, there was only a rusty-looking small clock. Name: clock. Type: dungeon tool. Quality: low quality. Function: turning the clockwork will grant you 90% immunity to pollution for 5 minutes. Can be used 3 times per day. Can it be taken out of the dungeon? No. Note: always hold it tightly. It will be the key to your survival. This thing could not be stored in the item slot. Su Chi hung it around his neck and searched the suitcase again, finding nothing else. It seems there are no more clues in the room. Su Chi's gaze naturally fell on the room's door. He was curious about what was outside, and the current eerie atmosphere seemed to tell him not to act rashly. He reached out and cautiously pushed the door open. Outside was a deep, dark corridor, lit only by the room's light, barely revealing 5 other closed doors beside his own. Each door seemed to have a number. Su Chi was number 5, and directly opposite was number 4. At that moment, a question mark suddenly appeared on the door opposite his own. Number 4. It displayed. The occupant of door number 4 is peeking at you through the peephole. Is someone there? Someone isn't necessarily a good thing. It is waiting for you to knock on the door. The information on the question mark changed again. The character it made him wonder how he could possibly knock. The entire apartment exuded a strangeness, and these other 5 occupants were likely no ordinary people. Without understanding what was going on, it was generally best not to do anything unnecessary. Just then, a bell rang out from the stairwell at the end of the corridor, like a bronze bell shaking. Sounds like these often signaled information, such as gathering, meal times, or class notifications. Immediately after, footsteps could be heard from the corridor stairwell. The sound was heavy, like walking in wet shoes on wooden planks. The rhythmic sound echoed in the deep, dark corridor. Su Qi looked over with a premonition of what might happen next. And the next moment, something unexpected happened to Su Qi. The door of room number 4 suddenly opened, and a tentacle reached out, pulled Su Qi straight over. Without any hesitation, Su Qi held the butcher knife in front of him. But then he heard a voice. "Don't be rash. I mean no harm." The next moment, with a thud, Su Qi was pulled into room number 4, and the door was shut behind him. But Su Qi was not someone who liked being passive. The moment he entered, he swung his knife. With explosive power, he pinned down the being that had pulled him in against the wall, holding the murderous butcher knife at their throat. This creature with tentacles turned out to be a human, and even wore glasses, looking somewhat refined. His pale face trembled with fear as he immediately knelt down without hesitation. Don't kill me." Chapter 9. Are all apartment residents abnormal? Su Qi kneeled so abruptly that he didn't even have time to react, and his first thought was that this brother must have practiced this motion, as it was executed seamlessly. He didn't lower his knife and was about to speak. At that moment, the footsteps and ringing in the corridor became increasingly prominent. Tentacle Man's face was ashen, filled with fear and anxiety. He struggled to make a shushing gesture with his tentacles, signaling Su Qi desperately not to make a sound. It was as if the owner of the footsteps outside might skin them alive. Su Qi didn't make any sudden moves. He too sensed a dangerous aura. He still wasn't sure about the worldview of this world, but judging from the tentacled man in the room, there was definitely a presence of strength beyond ordinary people, no longer just the killing demon type from the town. Soon, the footsteps and the ringing gently faded. Tentacle Man finally heaved a sigh of relief, then looked at Su Qi, only to become tense again, because Su Qi's knife was still positioned at his throat. Although his smile seemed harmless, his tone carried an icy indifference, as if saying, "If you don't explain, I might just make my move. So, can you explain to me now what exactly is going on?" Tentacle Man, trembling, said, "Didn't you read the apartment notice when you moved in? Such as, the apartment manager prepares food on the first floor. The ringing bell signifies a call for all residents to gather in the dining hall on the first floor to eat. Moreover, the apartment manager dislikes people seeing its face, so it returns to its own dwelling on the 3rd floor during meal times. What happens if someone sees it?" Su Qi asked with a hint of curiosity. "The previous tenant of room 5 didn't make it back to his room in time, and then I never saw him again. Next thing, you moved in." Su Qi mused. "So it seems you saved me just now? Thanks for that." "Don't mention it," Tentacle Man replied with a tearless sob. "But could you please put the knife down while you're saying thank you?" At that moment, the sound of a door opening came from outside, and footsteps resumed one after another in the corridor. "It's time to go eat," Tentacle Man hurriedly said. "The apartment notice is on the 1st floor. You can go and take a look." Su Qi stowed the knife in his item slot. Inside an instant, retrieving something from the item slot didn't conjure it out of thin air. It automatically connected to various pockets or linings of the clothing, making the items accessible from a spot invisible to others. The same logic applied to storage. After the door opened, they saw a bandaged monster, its body wrapped entirely in bandages with only one eye peeking out from a gap. It showed no reaction to Tentacle Man, but upon spotting Su Qi next to him, the monster's eye suddenly widened, displaying extreme madness and greed. It didn't say a word, then headed towards the staircase down to the 1st floor. Su Qi observed the "it wants to eat you" above the bandaged monster's head and, without changing his expression, followed Tentacle Man down to the 1st floor. Tentacle Man whispered, "Be careful. Don't mess with the others. They are very terrifying." There were 6 tenants in total. 2 of them had already taken their seats. One was a woman with split mouth, whose body was sewn with various threads, and her eyes gray and lifeless. The other tenant was Swollen Man, whose back was covered in clusters of abnormal growths resembling abscesses. The last one, arriving last, wore a long robe that covered their face, but one could vaguely see their body was rotten, emitting a foul stench, much like a corpse. This guy seemed to live in room 6, the one closest to the 3rd floor. The commonality among them was evident the moment Su Qi appeared. Their gazes all converged on him, expressing astonishment at first and then a greedy desire. They all want to eat you. Okay. Everyone's purpose is aligned and simple. Tentacle Man sat down with his head bowed, trembling, not daring to speak in front of these abnormalities. But Su Qi pulled out a chair, did not sit, and facing the many greedy eyes that looked down on him as if they were ants, he smiled. Everyone, look at me. I have something to announce. I am the new resident, Su Buxian, and am happy to be neighbors with all of you. I have many usual hobbies and hope to get along well with everyone. Su Qi's words elicited a few low chuckles from the abnormalities, their expressions appearing to mock. Happy to be neighbors and interact, huh? Only Corpse Man kept his head down, emitting a hoarse voice. Let's eat first, otherwise it will get cold. The food in front of each person at the table was covered with a lid, with a knife and fork placed beside it. Su Qi lifted the cover, and the food inside was beyond his expectations. The aroma of red wine wafted through the sauce, poured over half a steak, which surprisingly seemed appetizing. The others, as if starved, were the first to begin eating. Bandaged Monster held the knife and fork, cutting the steak forcefully, making a squeaky sound, his gaze firmly fixed on Su Qi. It was as if he was not cutting that piece of meat, but Su Qi himself. Split-Mouth Woman opened her mouth wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth, chewing on the steak with the sound of chewing wax, also staring intently at Su Qi, as if he was about to take him as a dish. Swollen Man and Corpse Man did not look towards Su Qi, just ate somewhat voraciously. Tentacle Man, however, was quite inconspicuous, even refusing to make a sound while eating. Su Qi picked up the knife and fork and cut the steak. This was a normal piece of meat, but rather special as a system message popped up. After eating, your spiritual power will decrease by 1, but you will gain a special ability. Note: death occurs. Return to login space to recover. When spiritual power reaches 0, decrease by 1. Su Qi looked at his 85 points of spiritual power, no big problem. After eating, spiritual power indeed decreased by 1, but at the same time, Su Qi felt a strange and peculiar strength beginning to activate. An itchy, bizarre eye slow. You have gained a temporary ability, Palm Eye. When activated, it will emit a blinding light. Great, useless ability. When the others saw the eyeball appear in Su Qi's palm, none of them showed a strange expression. Instead, their looks were cold, as if mocking. Su Qi noticed this. He had a guess. At this moment, everyone else finished eating, and Corpse Man spoke in a raspy voice. Whose turn is it for the duty today? Tentacle Man shuddered, frightened, lifting his tentacles. Me! Then it's up to you? Corpse Man revealed an ugly smile, terrifyingly terrifying. I hope you don't become the next person to disappear. Corpse Man stood up, under Su Qi's somewhat strange gaze, stepped on the stairs, and returned to his room on the 2nd floor. The others gradually departed as well, all turning back to look at Su Qi once more, not hiding their greedy eyes. Soon, only Tentacle Man, busy collecting plates, and Su Qi, reading the apartment's notice board, were left. Chapter 10. Main Quest Trigger. Apartment Notice. 1. Do not make any contact with the manager. 2. The manager is responsible for cooking and will notify residents when meals are ready. 3. Every day, according to room number, a resident is designated for duty, which includes cleaning up the dining hall plates, cleaning the 1st floor, and purchasing groceries for the next day. 4. No resident is allowed to enter the 3rd floor area. This notice was somewhat old, and the handwriting on it was not fresh, meaning these rules had been set in place a long time ago. Even though the residents of the apartment might have changed several times, they had never been altered. It looks fairly normal, but considering the bizarre circumstances within the apartment, Each rule seems to have deadly dangers, like Su-Chi turned his head to look at today's on-duty resident, Tentacle Man, who was trembling with plates in his tentacles, standing outside the kitchen too scared to enter, wearing an expression of fear. You keep shaking like that, and you're going to drop the plates. Tentacle Man jumped with fright and, seeing Su-Chi still on the first floor, said in a quivering low voice, "You should go back to your room. It's my duty today. There's no need to drag you into this." Su-Chi replied, "Then you, tell me what exactly is going on here. And this palm eye of mine." His palm eye was tightly closed. It would only open when activated. Tentacle Man gave Su-Chi a strange look, fell silent for a moment. "It seems you are an outsider. No wonder you don't know anything and haven't been contaminated." He waved his tentacles. "We have all been contaminated. While pollution has given us special abilities, prolonged exposure leads to mental breakdowns, and eventually we become monsters completely. There are many terrifying things inside the first floor, and every resident on duty has to be extremely careful. If one isn't careful, their contamination will worsen." Su-Chi quickly understood what he meant by pollution, because when some sauce from the plates accidentally spilled onto the carpet, a terrifying low growl emitted from the kitchen. Then, Tentacle Man became rigid. Su-Chi also felt a ringing in his ears that made him feel faint. Spiritual power -1. So that's it. In other words, it's a loss of sanity value. Reflected numerically, it means decreased spiritual power, and the lower the spiritual power, the more severe the transformation into a monster. But Tentacle Man's reaction seemed even more intense. Not only was he trembling all over, but his tentacles were spraying water. Did he just wet himself? Su-Chi dodged the water and then steadied the plate in his hands. Otherwise, if the plate broke, more terrifying things were likely to happen. Thankfully, the low growling only lasted a few moments. Tentacle Man came back to his senses, his face deathly pale. "It's over. I'm definitely going to die. Definitely going to die." Su-Chi looked toward the dusky kitchen. "You won't die. Just complete everything properly without making mistakes, and you'll be fine."
No.
"That's not the point. It's going out to find groceries next that's the scariest." Tentacle Man trembled. "Although we have to be careful of pollution in this apartment at all times, it's already the safest place. The city outside has long since collapsed. We can only gain abilities by being contaminated, gaining the strength to survive." Su-Chi paused and then asked, "What happens if you don't find any groceries?" Tentacle Man was silent, opening his parched lips, and said faintly, "I will become food." Everything became clear. So this is the worldview of this world. At the same time, after learning this information, the system also popped up an information panel.
Main quest triggered.
Survive for 10 days. Investigate the third floor room. Find the source of the ruin. Choose one of the 3 main missions to pass. The main mission finally appeared. Su-Chi looked over, and the difficulty of the 3 missions was obvious at a glance. Surviving 10 days was the simplest, but of course that was only relatively speaking. Whether it was the duties of the day or going out to forage for food, there was a risk of losing spiritual power. Most importantly, he had also been targeted by the guests. To explore the third floor room meant he would become enemies with the manager. And finding the source of the breakdown was the most difficult mission. The source was definitely in the city outside, which had fallen into complete pollution, likely filled with all kinds of monsters everywhere. Su-Chi suddenly asked a question. "By the way, do you know why those guests are targeting me?" "Because you're normal," Tentacle Man said with a bitter smile. "Being normal here makes you an anomaly, and it also means you haven't been contaminated. If they eat you, they can alleviate the symptoms of their contamination." "I see." Su-Chi's gaze flickered slightly. He didn't say which mission he would choose first, but seemed to think of something. "How about this? I'll take over the duties for today. All right?" "Why?" Tentacle Man was shocked. "Because I'm a bright and cheerful big boy, always happy to help." Su-Chi patted his shoulder. "Plus, I have something I want to verify." Tentacle Man trembled, wanting to agree, but then violently shook his head. I can't do that. You've just gained your ability and you know nothing. You will die. Suchi smiled and said, You're not a bad person at heart, but are you sure you can get through today? Don't worry. Leave it to me. Tentacle Man looked hesitant, but ultimately, his fear of death won over. He reached out his hand, took out a notebook, and gave it to Suchi. This has all the things you need to be aware of during my time on duty. You must read it carefully. You've just become contaminated. As long as there aren't any major problems, you won't run into trouble. Suchi took the notebook and nodded. I'll keep it in mind. Once Tentacle Man returned to his room on the second floor, Suchi opened the notebook and flipped through it, then picked up the plate and went straight into the dark kitchen. Kitchen notices. Make sure to wash the plates thoroughly and never look up while washing them. Make sure the freezer door in the kitchen is locked. Suchi placed the plate under the faucet and turned on the running water. But instead of looking down, he did the opposite. He lifted his head and looked up, where a bizarre monster's body was impaled, hanging on a hook, staring back with its unblinking oily green eyes. In an instant, Suchi felt a sting in his eyes, as if various strange hallucinations appeared before him. Spiritual power -1. The weirdness disappeared after he looked away. Suchi had a strange expression, somewhat at a loss for words. Indeed, there's a problem here. Is this pollution damage not a bit too low? Why is it all -1? Didn't they see my 85 points of spiritual power? How long will it take to reduce that? Suchi fell into deep thought. He didn't try again, though. Although the cost of trial and error was low, there was no need to waste it. And he realized something. My spiritual power seems to be higher than the normal level for this instance. If it were other players, such an intensity would be reasonable. Normal players have limited attribute points and would definitely prioritize physical strength, and movement techniques which can be quickly converted into real power. No one would initially put attribute points into spiritual power, which doesn't seem to have much use at present. So players generally only have the initial 10 points of spiritual power, allowing only a very few mistakes. But Suchi, clearly he was an exception. Chapter 11: The Source of Collapse. Every resident had a special ability that grew stronger with the worsening of their pollution level, and this also greatly altered their appearance and mind. So they were very greedy for themselves. The ability of Tentacle Man was to secrete a potent toxin from his tentacles, which was also his reliance for survival. This was something Suchi had learned from his notes, which also contained cautionary advice on how to stealthily avoid powerful abnormalities when going out and how to ambush them, among other things. To survive, he really put in a great deal of effort. Suchi had also finished cleaning the first floor. The apartment's contents were indeed dangerous. Shadows lurked in the bathroom mirror, blood boiled in the toilet, and the freezer in the kitchen seemed to contain something alive. Well then, it's time to go out and buy groceries. Suchi was not afraid. Although this was a spooky instance, shopping for groceries was one of his favorite activities. The joy of haggling with the aunties and uncles at the bustling market, driving down the prices, was a pleasure in its own right. Only this time he was facing abnormalities, and the price would have to be slashed in a more physical sense. He put the 100-man slaughter blade in his hand and stepped out with confidence. Stepping outside, he could see the desolate city streets, the cold wind blowing from unknown corners. The streets were littered with abandoned cars and mottled walls, signaling that this condition seemed to have persisted for quite some time. Occasionally, he could hear a heavy panting sound, like that of a wild dog shaking itself, coming sporadically. Upon stepping onto the street, Suchi saw the information. Every minute spent in the land of pollution, spiritual power will be -1. From this, it seemed he could at least stay here for a little over an hour, and he also had a timepiece that could isolate 90% of the pollution on him. Looking for ingredients is just one part of going out. The more important thing is to see if I can find the source of collapse. With Suchi's supermodel-like spiritual power, he naturally would not settle for just surviving 10 days or entering the third floor. He was a grown man now. He wanted all 3 tasks. He continued along the street. Soon enough, Su Qi saw an abnormality resembling a hyena. It was half the height of a person and pierced with various metal scraps, its flesh turned inside out. Yet this did not impede its movements in the slightest. Name: Level 1 Pollution Abnormality. Strength: 20. Movement Technique: 20. Physical Strength: 500. Spiritual Power: 0. It twitched its nose and noticed Su Qi, then lunged with a crimson tongue, in a brainless, frenzied manner. Swoosh! The 100-man slaughter blade radiated a malevolent aura, brimming with cold light. Su Qi did not hesitate to charge forward. His physical strength was full now, and he could fully wield the deadly blade. The abnormality was extremely fast, but lacking in brain cells, it charged straight into the blade. Su Qi's wrist twisted, and with the attribute bonus of the blade, the sharp edge sliced swiftly and accurately through, like cutting through tofu, easily claiming its head without any resistance. Although its strength and speed are greater than that of an ordinary person, without a brain, it can't even compare to the killing demons of the little town. He kicked away the abnormality's head and kept walking along the street. Although some abnormalities appeared along the way, they were all about the same level as the first hyena-like creature, dangerous but not enough. But when he reached the next block, Level 2 pollution abnormalities started to appear, their strength and movement technique averaging around 30, although Su Qi managed to deal with them. Now his strength and movement technique attributes were both 15, and with the bonus from the 100-man slaughter blade, he could burst forth with comparable might. Plus, the most important thing, combat was not just about comparing attributes for victory or defeat. If the opponent wasn't bulletproof, sometimes it was a matter of a single blow, especially since Su Qi also possessed a powerful skill called Thunderbolt in his hand. Su Qi moved on. This is the third block. The pollution is even more apparent, and the abnormalities are getting stronger. That means I'm not going in the wrong direction. The closer I get to the source of collapse, the more severe the pollution. Su Qi could already distinctly hear various spiritual pollution-like screams, resonating with his heart, making them hard to ignore. He looked at the prompt in front of him, Spiritual Power -4, then did not retreat, but instead turned on the watch to activate it. You will be immune to 90% of pollution, duration 5 minutes. Instantly, he felt a clarity wash over his mind, the surrounding screeches diminishing to a mere whisper. The area up ahead is lethal now. Su Qi looked toward the end of the block and could also see some huge vague figures in the mist, standing 5 to 10 meters tall, some carrying objects as big as buses, footfalls thundering on the ground. They are all monsters now. He quickened his pace, sprinting down the streets. This time, he must acquire the information he needed. Su Qi never returned empty-handed. The massive aberration moved slowly and didn't notice Su Qi following behind, allowing him to quickly reach the end of the street. At this dilapidated intersection, Su Qi controlled his movements, then peeked out, and at that instant, he felt as if the hissing sound was a horde of demonic spirits howling into his brain. But with the immunity from the watch, he was instantly clear-headed. At the same time, he could finally see the streets a kilometer away. That was the city center. All the buildings were flattened, surrounded by astonishingly huge monstrosities. Jellyfish-like tentacle monsters shrouded the sky like black shadows. Disproportioned human-shaped monsters, their heads like 2 sirens, moved slowly. And a mountain of flesh full of abscesses, every lump of its flesh sprouting eyes. Spiritual Power -1. Even the watch couldn't completely ward off the sight. And at the center of it all, there seemed to be an item placed there, unclear from this distance. Is that the source of pollution? Su Qi could see ? and exclamation point appear, but was too far away to glean more information. However, Su Qi withdrew his gaze. Now that he knew where the source was, the information he had gathered was sufficient. What came next was to return and plan, because each of those terrifying giant monsters was exceedingly dangerous, far beyond what he could currently contend with. Relying solely on the watch and the Thunderbolt skill to bypass these monsters and reach the center had a success rate of perhaps less than 1%. 10 minutes later, Su Qi, carrying the body of a level 2 abnormality, returned to his apartment. He placed it in the kitchen freezer, which was filled with various abnormal parts. Eyeballs, tentacles, ears studded with rusted nails, and so forth. It seemed these were leftovers from what the administrator had cooked. And at that moment, a series of heavy footsteps began to echo, followed by a terrifying, deep voice. "It doesn't seem to be your turn to be on duty today. What are you doing?" Su Chi turned around, the full body bandages making the identity of the person before him clear. The bandaged man. But never mind. It stared at Su Chi, issuing a strange laugh, while holding a sickle in its hand. "Knowing you're a hot commodity and still daring to wander alone. I'm really quite lucky." Chapter 12. Entering the third floor. Bandaged man's scythe, swift as lightning, swept out an impressive cold gleam, aiming straight for Su Chi. Su Chi sensed trouble and quickly retreated. The opponent's strength was at least around level 2 pollution, not just an ordinary monster, and most importantly, it was intelligent. The scythe fiercely embedded itself in the nearby wooden board. This guy seemed to be a long-time resident of the apartment, well aware of the kitchen's taboos, knowing what was safe and what would trigger punishment. Seeing that Su Chi had dodged, it grew even more excited. "I'll thoroughly sever your limbs and slowly savor them inside." Bandaged man charged again, his entire body's bandages whipping out as if alive, coiling towards Su Chi. This appeared to be his ability. Su Chi chopped off the bandages surrounding him, but the scythe stirred up a cold wind in the dark kitchen, aiming to cut Su Chi at the waist with a lethal arc. Bang! Su Chi blocked with his sword, retreating several steps. At the same time, physical strength -30, current 120. Bandaged man tore off the bandages from his face, revealing a lipless mouth and a row of blood-red teeth. "Those guys not taking action, allowing me to enjoy this alone. Ha ha ha. What luck. Ha ha ha, your mom." Su Chi burst forward, choosing not to use Thunderbolt, since the skill had a high consumption rate, which would deplete his physical strength. He stretched out his palm, revealing the palm eye on his left hand. Snap! The palm eye opened, erupting with a blinding burst of light. Su Chi originally intended to cover its vision and then strike. However, unexpectedly, at the moment the light appeared, bandaged man trembled violently, showing an extremely pained expression. Su Chi was surprised. Is this thing holy light? And in that lightning-fast moment, it was enough for Su Chi. He stomped forward, thrusting his long sword from the right wrist and plunging it into bandaged man's chest. His eyes widened, filled with bloodshot. He screamed, "SSS. It hurts. It really hurts. Pain is normal. It's always like this the first time." Bandaged man didn't understand, but he went insane. "Killing me won't let you escape. Those guys are all watching you. You've only got one way out. Death." With blood on his face, Su Chi pulled out the sword, his expression unreadable to bandaged man. "Don't worry. I'll be visiting each one in turn. No one will escape." As bandaged man shuddered and collapsed, convulsing continuously, his body gradually lost life. Looking at the corpse on the floor, Su Chi already had an idea, a dangerous and bold idea. Of course, he needed assistance. Su Chi placed bandaged man's body in a freezer, then cleaned the blood off himself and walked up the spiral staircase to the second floor. Just as he reached the second floor corridor, a mass of question mark appeared. "They are all watching you, wanting a piece of you. So they held back because they feared each other?" No wonder bandaged man was excited when he found himself alone. Su Chi ignored this information, walking straight to the door of Tentacle Man at number 4, without even knocking. Tentacle Man cracked the door open, nervous yet somewhat pleased. "You made it back alive?" In his eyes, Su Chi was just an ordinary person who had recently acquired special powers. Although proficient with a knife and capable of handling a weakling like him, he was no match for the other residents and the monsters outside. "Let's talk inside." Su Chi didn't hesitate, pushing the door and entering. "You're injured." Tentacle Man saw the blood on Su Chi and immediately reached out, I can secrete a coagulating slime.
Sui, stop.
I'm not injured. This blood belongs to some unlucky guy. So you're saying you found some ingredients? Tentacle Man said excitedly. His duty was replaced by Su Chi. But if Su Chi hadn't succeeded, he too wouldn't have escaped death. Su Chi nodded, narrowing his eyes. That's not the point. First a question. How potent is the toxin in your tentacles? What level of abnormality can it affect? Tentacle Man was stunned. I don't know. Tentacle Man hurriedly said, because I only dare to attack the abnormalities around the apartment. If it's that kind, it would knock them down instantly. Then lend me some. I'll give it a try. A little bit is totally fine. Tentacle Man's voice suddenly cut off as he stared wide-eyed at Su Chi pulling out a large jar stolen from the kitchen. A 2L one at that. Tentacle Man's face turned green. Is this borrowing a little? This is killing me. Bite the bullet, you can do it. Su Chi revealed his pearly white teeth, smiling sincerely. Tentacle Man, wanting to cry but unable to shed tears, could only extend 2 tentacles, continuously secreting poison. 1 minute later. 1/10 is done. I can't take any more. Hold on a bit longer. 5 minutes later. 1/3 is done. I'm really going to die. A man must not say he can't. Under Su Chi's urging, more and more poison filled the jar, eventually reaching halfway. Tentacle Man had already turned pale. His face gaunt as if he had lost a lot of weight, collapsed on the floor. Su Chi, satisfied, hugged the jar and opened the door. He turned back and said, "Oh, just a reminder. Come out 10 minutes later during tomorrow's mealtime. I need to discuss some matters with these neighbors." Tentacle Man stared blankly at Su Chi's smile. He didn't know what the other planned to do, but intuition told him something big was going to happen tomorrow. The next day, the manager, dragging his heavy body, appeared from a door on the 3rd floor, his steps slowly touching the ground. The dim corridor was comforting to him. In this apartment, he was the existence everyone feared. Nobody dared defy the rules stated on the apartment notice. Nor did anyone know his true face. Now, he was going downstairs to cook, make food from the ingredients, then pick some things he needed. As the manager walked down the 2nd floor's spiral staircase, door number 5 cracked open slightly, then a figure walked out from inside the room. This figure was Su Chi. He looked towards the dark end of the corridor, sniffing the scent still lingering in the air, and without turning his head, walked toward the 3rd floor. Su Chi aimed to use the time the manager was cooking to thoroughly check out the 3rd floor. Time was tight, at most only 10 minutes. Su Chi arrived at the stairs. The 3rd floor was an attic, currently firmly locked with thick chains. Although I don't have the key, but... Su Chi saw the question mark, displaying insert a thin wire, move it up and down, left, right, then rotate clockwise 3 times to open. 10 seconds later, there was a click from the lock and the chain visibly loosened. Su Chi slowly pushed the door open, his hand also holding a butcher knife and a clock, ready to ward off danger. But the next second, the anticipated danger and horror did not appear. Su Chi frowned intensely as he looked into the attic, as if he had seen an unbelievable sight. He stood in the midst of the attic, his gaze gradually calming down. If this is the truth, I can only say, in a world that seems mad, even this bit of warmth is crazy. It was a pink room, without a hint of darkness or horror. The room was filled with cute dolls and girls' dresses. On the table, there was a photo frame. The photo framed inside displayed a beautiful little porcelain doll-like girl holding her father's hand and smiling sweetly. But now, the girl's corpse lay in a cradle, with a head intact, the rest entirely made of other abnormalities' body parts. Chapter 13: The True Identity of the Administrator. The bell rang. The manager, dragging his heavy steps, moved along the corridor after finishing the meal preparations. A minute after his footsteps had disappeared, the doors of the rooms began to open one after the other. Swollen Man and Split-Mouth Woman headed downstairs. The door of Tentacle Man was tightly closed. He had heeded Suchi's advice and stayed in his room obediently. Another minute passed. The door to room number 6 opened, and Corpse Man, dressed in a thick black robe, slowly walked out of his room. As he stepped out, his gaze slightly trembled. He saw Suchi, who was leaning against the corridor wall, apparently waiting for something. Waiting for that tentacle guy across the door? Corpse Man remained calm. These two were weak. It was normal for them to stick together, a smart choice. But in the face of so many dangerous abnormalities, it was hardly useful. It should be soon now to see the other residents making their move on this new guest. This had nothing to do with himself. After all, the tenants in the apartment would constantly change, and he was pleased to watch these people fight, though he was still unaware that one of them, Bandaged Man, was already gone. Suchi placed the butcher knife inside his lining and, after checking his fully recovered physical strength from resting the whole day, got up and moved. I hate beating around the bush. I prefer simplicity and brutality. Next, it's time to have a proper chat with these neighbors. Tentacle Man sat nervously on the edge of his own bed, occasionally glancing towards the door, wanting to go check the situation, but recalling Suchi's advice from yesterday, he sat down worriedly again. He said yesterday he wanted to talk to the neighbors. But those guys are all crazy, terrifying abnormalities. How could he talk calmly with them, as someone who had been there for a while? Tentacle Man didn't lack ideas like Suchi's. He had indeed gifted some of his valuable possessions to other residents, although it hadn't been much use. But fortunately, these monsters didn't care about someone as insignificant as him. What was the situation outside now? Tentacle Man's gaze turned towards the door. Because the floor between the second and first floors was very thick and added to the spiral staircase, he couldn't hear a thing. It had been 5 minutes now. He wondered what the situation was. He might have already been killed. Tentacle Man actually had some guesses. Although he was timid and not strong, he could tell Suchi was not an ordinary tenant. He had guts. But guts didn't serve as food. 10 minutes finally slowly passed. Tentacle Man stood up, gradually opening the door. The hallway was still engulfed in darkness. He tiptoed towards the spiral staircase. His mind already began to panic wildly. Perhaps the next scene he would see was Swollen Man, Corpse Man, Bandaged Man, and Split Mouth Woman sitting at the dining table, knives and forks in hand, cutting into Suchi on the table. Tentacle Man crouched down, holding his breath as he peeked his head out from beside the mahogany staircase. What he saw next was beyond belief. The entire first-floor hall looked as if it had just gone through an explosion. The carpet and surrounding walls were charred, and as for the dining table in the middle, it had long been blasted into pieces, splinters flying everywhere. And at this moment, on a patch of open ground, 3 figures were lying there. Swollen Man was bloody all over, hanging by his buttocks on the wall lamp, but being an abnormality, he still gasped for breath. Split Mouth Woman's teeth had all fallen out. With disheveled hair, she looked utterly miserable, one arm blown off like a rag doll far away. The final Corpse Man had been torn apart, 1 piece east and 1 piece west. And as if that wasn't secure enough, their entire bodies were tightly bound with white bandages, rendering them unable to struggle. Meanwhile, Tentacle Man stood still as a statue. What happened, Suchi? At that moment, footsteps slowly approached, and Suchi emerged from the kitchen, wiping the blood off his hands with a rag. Stop loitering there. Come down. His tone was oddly normal, as if he was calling me down to dinner. Tentacle Man didn't know how he got to the first floor. All he felt were those 3 pairs of crimson eyes piercing his body like knives. He was trembling and tearless. What exactly happened here? Nothing much, just some food laced with poison, coupled with a screech that activated all the pollutants in the apartment, and a small thunderball. Tentacle Man didn't understand but was greatly shocked. What on earth happened in those 10 minutes? The poison must have been the same one he had handed out yesterday, activating all pollutants on the first floor of the apartment. How horrifying. He didn't even dare to think about it, yet Suchi acted as if nothing were wrong. As for the final thunderball, it was no longer significant. I've already put all the pollutants back where they belong. There won't be any problems now, Suchi said indifferently. With a mere twist of a clock, activating all the apartment's pollutants only cost him a minor -1 in spiritual powers. But for the others, it was lethal. What about the bandaged monster? Tentacle Man suddenly realized someone was missing and muttered, "Don't you find the bandages on their bodies familiar?" Tentacle Man suddenly understood. You made a deal with the bandaged monster.
Sui pointi do overhead.
Tentacle Man looked up and saw a body that had been dead for some time, hung upside down from the ceiling by bandages. It was originally hidden inside the chandelier on the ceiling, but it fell out due to the explosion being a bit too intense. Tentacle Man shuddered as he trembled, looking at Suchi. He was terribly wrong. He thought this new resident was just an ordinary person. Now, it seemed he was the most dangerous entity, kneeling before the boss. He had already knelt, so no harm done. After the shock, Tentacle Man remembered there was still an unknown horror in the apartment, and hurriedly said, "So what do we do now? Clean up first? Otherwise, when the caretaker comes out tomorrow and sees this, he'll explode." He looked with a grim expression at the ravaged first floor. But how do we clean this up? Suchi looked at the eager and anxious Tentacle Man, seeming genuinely considerate. He smiled. "Don't worry, the caretaker won't be coming out." "Huh. He has always been here." Tentacle Man started, shrinking back in fear. "Where? We should hide quickly. The notice clearly prohibits any contact with the caretaker." Suchi slowly moved his gaze towards Tentacle Man. The anxious Tentacle Man, somewhat scared, adjusted his glasses, looked back, saw 3 shadows behind him, and hurriedly said, "Could it be one of them?" Suchi simply smiled, glancing above Tentacle Man's head where A had been hovering since day 1. The message simply read 5 words. "Apartment caretaker. Chapter 14. I said we should have a good chat." Suchi's gaze slowly fixed on Tentacle Man. After what seemed like a few seconds, Tentacle Man's face stiffened slightly, and he let out a forced chuckle. "Are you saying I'm the one? You're not kidding me, are you?" He flicked the tentacles off his body, shaking his head innocently. "How could I possibly be the apartment manager?" Suchi sniffed. "Why not? There's a damp, sticky smell in the air of the hallway, and I've also found drops of liquid on the floor of the corridor." Tentacle Man said helplessly. "People go downstairs every day. Of course, there will be traces left behind, and it's too dark in the hallway to see anything clearly." Suchi gently lifted his palm, revealing the tightly closed palm eye on it. "Then I'm sorry. I specifically went to check during the manager's cooking time, and you forgot, didn't you? My eyes, they can glow." Upon hearing this, Tentacle Man wasn't swayed, but instead his bitter smile deepened. "Then it's even less likely to be me. Yesterday, while the manager was cooking, I was clearly in the same room with you." Suchi mused to himself. "That's also something I found puzzling at the start until I saw it." He walked towards Corpse Man, using the butcher's knife to cut open the black robe on the body. Instantly, a foul stench hit them. You could also see that all the parts on Corpse Man were stitched together, and the flesh on them was starting to rot, oozing putrid blood. Tentacle Man, witnessing this scene, didn't speak and slowly adjusted his glasses with a tentacle. His voice began to change. "What about it?" As if he hadn't seen it at all, Suchi spoke softly. "It is just a patched-up puppet, just like that little girl in the 3rd-floor room of yours." No sooner had he finished speaking, the veins on Tentacle Man's face surged out like pulled-up tree roots, his expression raging to the extreme. 2 tentacles, which previously seemed harmless, now violently swelled by several meters. A mass of sticky fluid mixed with poison hurtling towards Suchi. The palm eye in Suchi's hand suddenly burst open, a fierce flash incredibly dazzling, stopping the deadly tentacles in their tracks from lunging further. At this moment, the originally refined face of Tentacle Man now turned unspeakably fierce and mad. "You went in there?" "Of course." Suchi sighed. "I saw a lot inside." Tentacle Man's face, D. His frenzied demeanor was as if Su Chi had defiled that little hut. The tentacles struck again, now faster and more ferocious. This guy had been hiding his true strength all along, wanting Su Chi to think he was weak, to foster a sense of shared enmity. But in fact, his strength was stronger than all the other abnormalities. Otherwise, the previous batches of residents wouldn't have been replaced time and again. Su Chi's form retreated swiftly. He knew well that the tentacles were covered in poison. Once ensnared, he wouldn't even be able to utter a cry of resistance before being knocked out. Probably how those people before had disappeared. Tentacle Man growled. "You can't run away. Run? Hardly necessary." Su Chi, instead, watched the approaching tentacles with a calm expression. "Actually, there's one more thing I didn't mention, or rather, I lied to you about. That is, I never put the pollutant back." Su Chi's eyes shifted to the kitchen behind Tentacle Man. "And I let all the pollutants in the kitchen out." Tentacle Man's eyebrows twitched violently. The air behind seemed to stir in response, as though some ancient fierce beast was lurking there. A horrifying roar erupting in the small first floor. Despair, terror, filth, unspeakable, spiritual impact. In this instant, the massive impact instantly engulfed the first floor. Su Chi activated the clock in an instant, yet even so, his spiritual power dropped by 2 points, sufficient to understand the terror of this impact. Tentacle Man fared even worse as his entire body collapsed to the ground, convulsing non-stop. He couldn't withstand such a horrifying pollution either. Every time he cooked, he would toss the core part of the abnormality into the fridge, which explained the extremely terrifying accumulation of pollutants there over such a long time. It was truly a case of reaping what one sows. "What do you say? Can you still stand up?" Tentacle Man, having suffered a great impact and nearly having his spirit shattered to the point of unconsciousness, clenched his teeth and lifted his head, his eyes full of hatred staring at Su Chi. "Even if I die, I will take you down with me. I will never let you defile my daughter." Su Chi, with a dark expression, said, "How can you slander someone out of thin air? When did I ever say I wanted to defile your daughter? And besides, your words make me sound like the villain." He walked up to Tentacle Man and said, "Didn't I tell you just yesterday? I wanted to have a proper talk with you." Tentacle Man shivered slightly, looking at the young man in front of him. The madness in his eyes faded halfway. He had thought Su Chi was overestimating his capabilities by wanting to confront the abnormal residents. Yet he hadn't expected those words were addressed to him. It was really quite ironic. "So, can you calm down?" Tentacle Man's expression fluctuated, looking at Su Chi strolling leisurely in front of a pile of ruins. He knew he probably couldn't outplay this guy. In the end, he compromised, his voice hoarse as he said, "What do you want to talk about? Do you want this apartment? Or is it something else?" Su Chi replied calmly with a smile. "Of course, it's about cooperation. I seem to recall saying at the dinner table yesterday that I hope to get along well with all the neighbors, rather than fighting and killing. It's just that one after another, you've been provoking me, leading to the current situation." Tentacle Man stiffened, then gave a faint and miserable smile, as if that indeed was the case. "It seems everything is self-inflicted, just like it was back then." His tone of voice was slow as he lowered his head, sinking into memories. "Actually, this city was normal up until 2 years ago. Back then I was an ordinary doctor, with a perfect and happy family. Why had we suddenly entered a storytelling session?" Just as he was about to continue, Su Chi suddenly waved his hand, interrupting him. "Stop. No need to go on. I've seen it on the 3rd floor. It's nothing more than that your daughter and wife were in a car accident. Your wife died on the spot, and your daughter, barely clinging to life, was rushed to the hospital. Unaware, you were called to attend to the victims, and at the operating table, you saw your own daughter covered in blood, and before you could save her, you became twisted. After the descent of pollution, you moved into this kind of apartment, along with your daughter's corpse, trying to resurrect her using the special ability of your tentacles and your medical knowledge. He added one more sentence. Such a story, if put in a novel, is really quite cliché.
Tentacleman.
If he could move, he would have flung out his tentacles once more to slay Su Qi. I know it's tragic, and I do sympathize, said Su Qi. But what you're doing is pointless. Tentacle Man's expression became agitated. How could it be pointless? You've seen it. He pointed towards Corpse Man. I've made significant progress. After I created it, it can move, speak, and even cook. Su Qi ruthlessly interrupted him. It's just a rotting shell. You know that better than anyone, so why bother? Tentacle Man's face showed alternating expressions of light and shade. You don't understand. You just don't understand. Su Qi looked at him. I'm not here to discuss philosophy like the nature of consciousness and existence. I'm here to talk about cooperation. To put it simply, Su Qi calmly said, I can let you and your daughter talk. Tentacle Man's head jerked up, his eyes bulging, his expression one of disbelief, his voice trembling. Really? Of course it's true. It's more hopeful than messing with these things. But Su Qi then spoke a sentence that made Tentacle Man show a look of fear. You have to help me with the source of the collapse. Chapter 15 Preparations for Going to the Source of Collapse. Tentacle Man limped down the corridor, his facial expression uncertain. Do you really want to go to the source of collapse? It's an extremely dangerous place, filled with completely polluted abnormalities. No living creature dares to approach it. I know. I took a detour to the city center yesterday. Su Qi knew the dangers there even better. That's why I've come to collaborate with you.
Tentacleman.
All the previous guests were monsters, each one crazy and abnormal. Yet, even so, they were all extremely fearful of the outside world. Finally, there came a normal Su Qi, but it turned out he was the most abnormal of all, showing interest in the source of collapse and possessed a must-go attitude. Tentacle Man sighed and walked to the door of the apartment's storage room. I understand. I'll help you with all my strength. But can you really let me communicate with my daughter? Su Qi replied, I never deceive anyone. Bullshit. You just said you had released all the pollutants back. Tentacle Man's face veins bulged. His limping was due to being too severely impacted, almost collapsing.
Sui.
He said lightly, relax. Put your heart into your pelvis. He hadn't lied to him. When he was on the 3rd floor, he had seen information on the little girl. It displayed the lingering soul trapped in this polluted world, unable to be freed. Place an old item she used in the attic and draw a pentagram. You might discover her wishes.
Sui speculated.
This was a side mission of exploring the 3rd floor. Without much thought, it was clear the wishes were related to her father, either to resolve his emotional conflicts or to free her. Then he would gain her assistance, gradually uncover the identity of the manager, reveal the truth, engage in a massive battle, finally reform the crazed Tentacle Man, witness a father-daughter reunion, tearfully, and roll the movie's end credits. The general process for ordinary players to clear the game would be like this, otherwise they couldn't contend with Tentacle Man. Unfortunately, Su Qi didn't follow the process. When Tentacle Man opened the storage room, a terrifying presence emanated. The air seemed much colder, sending shivers down one's spine. He said in a deep voice, I'm not a good person, but I never kill indiscriminately. Over the last 2 years, I've provided each guest with food and shelter. Only when a guest breaks the rules or becomes completely polluted do I dispose of them. And the parts generated from their pollution are preserved as pollutants. Su Qi looked around. The storage room had numerous glass jars, all filled with various pollutants, containing some residual power from their original owners. If you want to head toward the source of collapse, consider 2 things. One is how to approach the source without collapsing, and second, how to avoid those huge abnormalities. Tentacle Man looked at Su Qi. The first you've evidently solved, but the second can only rely on me. Tentacle Man adjusted his glasses, his demeanor not crazed, a hint of intelligence shining through. Based on my 2 years of research and experiments, I've almost completely understood the pollutants and abnormalities. The power they contain is bizarre, like a virus. Even if the host dies, they don't immediately dissipate. Once they gather together, they become extremely powerful. Tentacle Man offered Su Chi two options. Your palm I might not be a combat ability, but it's very effective against the abnormalities. If you could absorb these pollutants, you might grow to an extremely powerful state, perhaps creating a gap in time to reach the source of collapse. Of course, you know the side effects too. You'll turn into one of those monstrous creatures and lose your sanity. Su Chi decisively passed. The second option? That would be creating an abnormality using all the pollutants I've collected, something terrifying, that could create an opportunity for you to approach. Su Chi's eyes flickered. Assessing its feasibility, he quickly nodded. We can give it a try. The two struck a deal and began to make plans. In the following days, Tentacle Man remained in the storeroom, constantly beginning new experiments. Su Chi wasn't idle either. He went out to extensively collect various abnormal bodies, aiming to preserve the remaining 70 points of spiritual power. He only left the house once a day, and his time outside was controlled to be within 15 minutes, timed precisely to return to the apartment by the clock. This way, his spiritual power remained entirely unspent. Meanwhile, Swollen Man and Split Mouth Woman had not yet died, being held captive by Tentacle Man with toxins. Although their bodies were immobile, their consciousness was exceptionally clear. They had never imagined that Tentacle Man was actually the most terrifying manager in the apartment complex. And the young man beside them, who was considered highly desirable, not only played with them at will but also did not spare the manager, all while chatting and laughing. Now, in their eyes, there was no madness left, only deep fear when they looked at Su Chi. The fifth day, the pollution entity finally took shape and could carry out certain autonomous movements after Tentacle Man injected a large amount of neurohormones. The sixth day, he gradually started incorporating a large amount of pollutants and various abnormal flesh as energy. The seventh day, Su Chi activated the exclamation mark, allowing Tentacle Man and his daughter to have a conversation. After the first 10 minutes where Su Chi asked a few questions, he left the rest of the time to Tentacle Man. The eighth day, the pollution entity turned out to be larger than imagined. It couldn't completely fit in the entire first floor of the apartment, but Tentacle Man was not satisfied. What he wanted was speed, the ability to lure the tiger away from the mountain. At the same time, Su Chi discovered something. The other party did not slack off at work after contacting his daughter, but became even more diligent and determined. What had happened during the time he was not on the third floor? The ninth day, there was nothing problematic with the pollution entity any longer, and Tentacle Man immediately began to modify Split Mouth Woman and Swollen Man. By the 10th day, everything was ready. Su Chi also saw that one of his main mission objectives, surviving for 10 days, had been marked as complete, and he could teleport out of the instance at any moment. I am getting ready to leave, Su Chi said with a smile, extending his hand to Tentacle Man. I won't be coming back this time. These past few days have indeed been hard. Tentacle Man also extended his tentacle, but instead of reaching for Su Chi's hand, he picked up the backpack from the ground and slung it over his shoulder. Su Chi paused, then shook his head. You don't need to do this. I am not like you, and our cooperation ends today. He could complete the task alone at any time and leave the instance. But it was different for Tentacle Man. If he died, he would really be dead. However, Tentacle Man's expression remained very calm, as though he had already made his decision. I have two reasons I must go. One is this pollution entity, which I can only control within 100 meters radius. Secondly, over the past days, I have spoken with my daughter numerous times. She is in a lot of pain and is very scared. This polluted world has imprisoned her, and she wants to be freed. Su Chi looked at him, slightly surprised. Such a realization? You've come to terms with it. This Tentacle Man was a bona fide daddy's girl, a psychologically dark version. How could I bear it? Tentacle Man's eyes reddened, his voice raspy. It's just, when I was creating the pollution entity, I seemed to foresee a wrong ending. I am afraid of myself, whether I truly want to relieve my daughter from this pain or selfishly keep her in this world to suffer. And what's most important is, Tentacle Man, trembling, lifted his head. My daughter is crying out to me for help. I couldn't save her on the operating table back then. How could I bear to watch her in pain now? He gritted his teeth, grabbed Su Qi by the shoulders, his face showing unprecedented determination. So no matter what, I must go. Chapter 16. Reaching the End. Su Qi and Tentacle Man stepped out from the doorway of the apartment complex. Outside the door stood a mountain-like structure reminiscent of a cement monster, comprised of various flesh and pollutants. It was a pollution abnormality. It was only as big as a basketball court at the moment. But as they proceeded, it would devour everything on the streets and grow gradually. Besides that, there were two elite monsters, Swollen Man and Split Mouth Woman, who were bloated with a considerable amount of pollutants filling their bodies. Tentacle Man had used his ability to secrete a large amount of tranquilizer to stabilize their minds. Remember, once you two get there, just run. It's your chance to survive, Tentacle Man said coldly, his gaze revealing a terrifying murderous intent. Otherwise, I'll throw you in right now. Both monsters trembled all over and hurriedly nodded. Let's go, we're moving out. Everyone boarded the body of the pollution abnormality, which rolled down the street like a tide, swallowing the surrounding monsters, abandoned cars, and broken street lamps at an extremely fast pace. It was loud, but indeed unstoppable. Level 1 and 2 pollution monsters couldn't even escape in time, and Level 3 and 4 monsters, which averaged 100 attribute points, had no choice but to flee hastily. In just a 5-minute journey, they had already reached the vicinity of the end of the block. At the same time, they also felt various deep moans, whispers, and impacts of spiritual power. I can't go any further from here, exclaimed Tentacle Man, taking a deep breath. He extended his tentacles, which developed spikes and viciously stabbed into the head of pollution abnormality, injecting a mass of green fluid. It will run forward as hard as it can, creating noise to divert attention. The rest depends on whether you can seize the opportunity. No problem, leave it to me, Su Qi nodded. Tentacle Man jumped down, attracting attention with Split Mouth Woman and Swollen Man. Of course, they had also been injected with a large amount of hormones. Otherwise, merely standing kilometers away from that horrifying source would cause their minds to collapse. Charge! The pollution abnormality was injected with a large quantity of stimulant hormones, doubling its speed in an instant. Su Qi, holding on to a part of the pollution abnormality, hid underneath it and then immediately activated the clock. The large pit at the center was a kilometer away. Its speed was extremely fast, nearly 50 meters in a second, recklessly charging forward under the influence of hormones. Its massive body naturally drew the attention of those horrifying monsters, comparable to evil spirits. Cloud-like jellyfish tentacles, a 50-meter-tall siren head, and a mountain of flesh covered in eyes all took notice. In that instant, every cell in Su Qi's body seemed to suffocate for a moment. His mind briefly went blank, and then the notification, Spiritual Power -2, Current 65 appeared. These were true evil spirits. Merely catching their gaze resulted in such terrifying spiritual impact. Without the clock's 90% immunity, Su Qi probably wouldn't have lasted 5 seconds. Here they come. Su Qi noticed that the 3 terrifying evil spirits, as if seeing an amusing toy, were all attracted by the mutated combination and started to move, chasing after it. At that moment, the mutated combination dashed forward, already having advanced 300 meters. 400 meters. 500 meters. Boom! A jellyfish tentacle fell from the sky like a skyscraper being directly thrown down, violently shaking the ground. The eyes on the flesh mountain emitted a strange light, dyeing the sky dome blood red. And finally, the siren head, whose headgear was not just for show, emitted a vibrating, terrorizing sound. At this moment, Su Qi felt as if struck by a heavy hammer, blood streaming from all his orifices. Even the clock's immunity couldn't hold up. At the same time, spiritual power -5, current 60. Su Qi spat out a mouthful of blood, his eyes regaining clarity. This evil spirit is still much weaker than the shadow illusion from the last instance. He could still hold on. But the mutated combination couldn't. It stopped in the last 300 meters. The hormones made it go mad. But the might of the three great evil spirits instilled it with extreme fear. It directly changed direction and started to frantically flee. It seems we can only get this far. Su Qi jumped off of it and, the moment he landed, burst forth with all his strength, starting to run toward the center. The three evil spirits were distracted and did not notice him. Just a dot as insignificant as an ant. Su Qi kept moving closer to the central crater. But the closer he got, the more visibly his spiritual power decreased. Spiritual power -2. Spiritual power -3. Spiritual power -4. Only 100 meters left. Su Qi's whole body surged with vital energy. Despite various spiritual impacts, his gaze was unwavering, and he moved as fast as an arrow released from a bow without stopping. Finally, he rushed to the edge of the gigantic crater at the city center, then turned his gaze into the pit. At that moment, his mind exploded. Whether his eyes were open or closed, they were filled with incomprehensible dark hues. Countless voices whispered in his ears as though various phantom limbs were pulling at his body. His consciousness seemed to be dragged into hell, or buried deep in the abyss, then thrown into a black hole. Even the clocks were clicking with numerous cracks forming. In the next second, his spirit was about to be torn apart like fragile paper. At this moment, the evil god's eye in Su Qi's item slot suddenly flashed with a bright red light, emitting an even more terrifying and astonishing aura. Boom! It was like two tides clashing. Su Qi's whole body shook violently, as if he was suddenly pulled from the bottom of the sea. His mind and spirit instantly clearing. He was drenched in sweat, his gaze astonished. What just happened? The moment he saw what was inside the pit, he had already lost consciousness, something no clock could withstand. The feeling was exactly the same as when the first instance's phantom arrived. But now he was pulled back. However, now was not the time to think about that. Although his spiritual power was still rapidly declining, Su Qi could now look directly at the object in the pit. It was a massive heart, weakly beating in a 50-meter-wide crater. Is this the source that polluted the world? Su Qi stared in shock. Who would have thought that a thing that created so many terrifying abnormalities, destroying the entire city, was just a nearly dead heart? And this heart had been beating here for 2 years. At this moment, Su Qi could finally see the content under question mark and exclamation point. The question mark told him, "This is the heart of an ancient god," while the exclamation mark showed, "Pierce it, and the pollution of this world will end," while also obtaining a heart of an ancient god on the verge of collapse. So that's how it is. Su Qi's gaze intensified, and without time to hesitate, as his spiritual power was descending shockingly fast, he produced his slaughter knife in his hand and charged up directly along the slope. At that moment, something unexpected happened. In this crater where no one but Su Qi was supposed to be present, suddenly there came a voice, sounding taunting as it laughed. "Mortal, your knife cannot pierce the heart of an ancient god." Chapter 17. There's always a traveling merchant in every game. Who is it? Although the unexpected voice was a complete surprise, Su Qi quickly looked up. Then he saw a figure sitting on the edge of the pit. The man wore a top hat and a purple tailcoat, with orange amber pupils in his black eyeliner. Sitting at the edge of the pit, one hand propping his chin, he cast his gaze over. Friend or foe? Su Qi didn't know, but the fact that the other party could sit there unscathed and smiling meant his strength was certainly not low. But no matter what, even if you were Ultraman, it wouldn't matter. Su Qi, right now, couldn't afford to respond or linger. Every second of hesitation only drained his spiritual power more. The figure's gaze followed Su Qi, seemingly appraising him, his pupils taking on an interested expression. as Su Qi approached the ancient god's heart. Finally, the figure made a move, reaching for his top hat, and like a magician, pulled out a small knife. With a flick of his fingertip, the fruit knife disappeared right where it was, as if it had traversed space. Use this. As Su Qi was running swiftly, he reached out instinctively and caught the small knife flying at high speed. He looked down. This knife, wasn't this just an ordinary fruit knife? But in the next moment, the panel popped up. Name, fruit knife. Type, equipment. Quality, immortal. Note, it was originally just a common knife, but with the endowed strength, it has the divine power to slice through anything. Su Qi's expression turned sharp. Who was this person giving him immortal quality equipment just like that? He didn't have time to hesitate as he firmly grasped it and stabbed it fiercely towards the ancient god's heart, which was within arm's reach. At this very moment, the heart, as if instinctively sensing danger, began to beat more violently, and a terrifying aura burst forth, as if it could block out the sun and cover the sky. The three evil spirits, as if suddenly going mad, rushed towards the crater. It seemed they were there to protect the heart from harm. Their roar was deafening. The whole sky dome changed color, the ground shook, and the clouds split apart. The might of the evil spirits, terrifying to such an extent. And the man sitting at the edge of the pit, his amber pupils flickering with light, uttered an unsatisfied remark. Too loud. Don't disturb my business. He put his top hat back on and pointed with his hand. Boom! The ground in the center of the city cracked. A huge hand made of molten lava burst forth from the ground and fiercely grasped the three evil spirits. Then, these horrifying evil spirits, that ordinary people couldn't even gaze upon, now completely lacked the ability to resist. Amidst their struggles and low growls, they were pulled by the lava hand down into the ground, never to be heard from again. Su Qi at this moment was unable to notice any of this. He was standing next to the heart, his spiritual power hitting its limit. The next moment, he plunged the small knife in his hand into the ancient god's heart with all his strength. Those thick blood vessels, filled with faces of ghosts, emerged, wailing and trying to pounce at Su Qi. But the power emanating from the knife released a suppressing aura, protecting him. Ah, 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 ah. In the city, countless pollutants screamed as if they too felt agony. A multitude of ghostly faces and evil auras vanished at a pace visible to the naked eye. Su Qi had only heard a boom. Centered around the ancient god's heart, a massive amount of dust was suddenly swept away, as if a gust of wind had dispersed all the wails, and in the blink of an eye, there was nothing left but utter silence. The screams and roars that filled his ears also came to an abrupt halt. Snap! The fruit knife in Su Qi's hand cracked apart, and as he gradually regained his focus, he watched the small knife turn to dust in his hands. And there it was, the heart before him that had become dilapidated and dull. Is it over? Su Qi no longer felt the onslaught of spiritual power. He was left with barely 3 points of spiritual power. For a split second, it felt as if his soul was about to be snatched away by those entities. Su Qi suddenly closed the panel and looked towards the distant figure, waving his hand. Although I don't know who you are, thanks for just now. I thank you? There's no need for that, the man replied with a light laugh. After all, this was a trade, and I never make a loss-making deal. Su Qi's gaze shifted slightly. May I ask for your esteemed name? You can call me Traveling Merchant. Su Qi's brows rose. Traveling Merchant? In many games, once an instance was cleared, there was a very small chance that a merchant who sold special items would appear as a hidden reward. So that's it. Su Qi glanced at the 3 main quests that were all completed and that he could leave the instance at any time. He was in no rush. What do you want from me? Indeed, having just punctured the ancient god's heart without the aid of this mysterious individual claiming to be the traveling merchant, he wouldn't have been able to complete it. But if the other party demanded too much, Su Qi would decisively teleport and flee, now that the main quest was complete. He quietly placed his hand on the ancient god's heart, ready to collect it into his item slot at any moment. The traveling merchant seemed to see right through Su Qi's thoughts. Chuckling, "Thinking of running away? I am not," Su Qi replied without blushing or skipping a beat. "I have traveled countless worlds. You have no idea how many people long to meet me, how many wish to make a trade with me." The traveling merchant looked at Su Qi, his eyes narrowing. "And you are thinking of running away? Also, stop trying to put the ancient god's heart into your item slot. I really am not. Stop making things up. I'm just tired and leaning here," Su Qi coughed, releasing his hand, surprised that the object couldn't be added to his item slot. The traveling merchant adjusted his hat, rising from the edge of the pit. He leaned on his cane, donned his gold-rimmed glasses, and stood there, the very picture of a gentleman. "Fate is a wonderful thing, and I give each person I meet a chance. After all, some might never encounter me in their lifetimes. For someone as weak as you to have such an encounter of strength with me, isn't it an interesting affair? The help just now, I could consider it free service, but if you want to take this heart, there will be a price to pay." Su Qi watched the ancient god's heart before him. Without a panel or any other information, this item seemed to have something special about it. Or perhaps the traveling merchant before him had tampered with it. It seemed he had no other means to take it with him. Su Qi decided to listen. "So, what is it you want?" The traveling merchant smiled lightly. "It's interesting, usually when people meet me, it is I who ask what they want, yet now you ask me in return. And what do people generally give you?" "Many things, some that pique my interest, items of equivalent value, interesting pollutants, or they might also trade their own lives, souls, and so forth." Su Qi suddenly paused. "You mentioned interesting pollutants." He took out a finger bone from his item slot that he had acquired from the real world through... Does this count? Chapter 18. Pay more. The finger bone was obtained while lying in the ghost house, along with a sheet of music from playing the piano at night school. Both had been of unknown use until the public test of Abyssal Paradise, when Su Qi discovered he could bring them into the game. And the only thing displayed on the panel was their simple name: Contaminated Finger Bone and Contaminated Sheet Music. It was only after the traveling merchant mentioned interesting pollutants that he remembered to take them out casually. The traveling merchant's gaze turned to the piece of finger bone in Su Qi's hand. After barely a glance, he clicked his tongue lightly and shook his head. "Such a weak pollutant, with barely any breath, is absolutely not worth collecting or trading." The traveling merchant stopped mid-sentence, suddenly furrowing his brow, as if sensing something, his figure disappearing in place and reappearing beside Su Qi. He didn't reach out directly but politely requested, "May I have a look?" "Of course." Su Qi handed it over without any hesitation. Although the traveling merchant dressed like a shifty dealer, he was indeed a gentleman, with strange principles when it came to trading. The traveling merchant adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, colors flashing in his pupils. "It seems somewhat interesting. This is not an ordinary pollutant. It appears to have been tainted with a trace of another power, nearly imperceptible, but clearly spiritual." He suddenly realized something and didn't continue. Instead, he handed it back to Su Qi, calmly saying, "All right, this thing seems a little interesting. It has slightly piqued my interest. You give it to me and I will take the ancient god's heart off your hands." Su Qi looked at the calm-faced traveling merchant who seemed utterly indifferent. He shifted his gaze upward to the words hovering above the traveling merchant's head. "He is very excited. He is determined to get that finger bone." Su Qi narrowed his eyes, sly dealer acting all coy, but knowing the other party's thoughts, he now had an idea. Su Qi first put it into his item slot, a move that made the traveling merchant's brow twitch almost imperceptibly. "Don't you want to trade anymore?" Su Qi sighed with a sorrowful tone. "That's the thing, I really want to trade, but this finger bone is of great significance. It's something left by my grandfather when he was cremated. He took great care of me since I was little and we depended on each other for 20 years. It is the only thing left in this world from my relative. So, I can't give it to you. For the first time, the traveling merchant was caught off guard, opening his mouth without knowing what to say. Fortunately, he wasn't an ordinary person, and after a moment's daze, he regained his composure, quickly saying, "You must understand the value of that ancient god's heart. Although it is a deceased object, very frail, it still possesses a trace of the ancient god's lineage, and, if you own it, you might be able to reactivate it in the future, gradually grow, and obtain the might of the ancient god. Don't you want it?" The traveling merchant urged. Su Chi took all this in. He shook his head still. "You misunderstand. That finger bone is the possession of my most important relative. I see it as an irreplaceable treasure." Su Chi paused, then added, "You'll have to increase the price." The traveling merchant looked lost, falling into a prolonged silence. He had to do this because, in that instant, he had nearly broken his countless times upheld trading principles. That was to toss this guy into the chaotic sea. He took a deep breath. "Don't go too far. I am the traveling merchant whom countless people beg to trade with." Su Chi spread his hands. "Then there's nothing to discuss, goodbye." With that, he was about to end the instance and leave. Naturally, the traveling merchant couldn't see his instance, but clearly knew he was about to teleport away, and hastily said, "Wait!" Su Chi, however, didn't stop as the other had hoped. Instead, he was already preparing to confirm whether to leave the instance and, while confirming, he said, "Bro, I've got other things to do, so I'll stop chatting. I still have to light incense for my grandpa." I'll add. The traveling merchant almost spat out these words through gritted teeth. He actually got read and pinned down by this weak individual, and this guy wasn't giving him any chances. He had no choice but to comply. Su Chi smiled, halted his actions, and quietly waited for him to continue. The traveling merchant took a deep breath. He never thought his emotions would fluctuate so much. "First off, I want to tell you that this finger bone isn't anything powerful. The pollution and strength on it are so weak they're almost negligible. I want it because it contains a trace of information that's very important to me." Su Chi took note of this information and didn't interrupt. "This ancient god's heart is even more important for you. However, it still has some residue of pollution and aura, which you naturally can't take with you. You need me to process and refine it. This job isn't as simple as it may seem." Su Chi nodded in sudden realization. I see. That'll be a lot of work for you then. And," he paused for a moment, "what about the extra charge?" Traveling merchant. He wanted to say something, but instead sighed helplessly and then took off his top hat. He pulled out an old-fashioned speaker from inside. It looked quite old, all black, with only 3 buttons for play/pause and track selection. "What's this?" "I've unlocked the shielding. Take a look for yourself." The traveling merchant seemed to have dealt with many players like Su Chi and knew they had their own ways of inspecting items. Su Chi looked over. Name: Horror Nursery Rhyme. Quality: perfect. Function: when it plays the sound of the past, strength, movement technique and physical strength will double, lasting for 3 minutes, cooldown time 1 hour. Note: in my BGM, no one can beat me. His eyes instantly lit up. Nice item. Does it need batteries? No need, the traveling merchant said expressionlessly. Though I really don't want to remind you, as a matter of principle for a merchant, I need to tell you that this also has side effects. When the music plays, the sound of the past will also reduce your spiritual power. Can it change discs? Yes. The traveling merchant gritted his teeth. But that way, it'll just be an ordinary speaker. Is that sound the key? Su Chi suddenly thought of his piece of sheet music, which seemed to have a few tunes preserved on it. The traveling merchant no longer cared about Su Chi. He went over to the ancient god's heart and began to clean the residual aura and pollutants. 2 minutes later, the traveling merchant withdrew his hand. It's done. Su Chi tried it out and, indeed, was able to store the heart in his item slot. The trade is now complete. The traveling merchant flicked away the residue he had collected from the ancient god's heart. Appreciate it. Su Chi passed over the finger bone readily. I hope the next time we meet, you'll keep my grandpa's finger bone well preserved. The traveling merchant's mood had returned to calm. He opened a void channel and turned around saying, "There'll be no next time. I travel between various worlds, and the probability of us meeting again is virtually zero. Although this is our first meeting, it's also our last. And it was the most unpleasant one at that." With that said, he disappeared from this place without any hesitation. Chapter 19, Leaving the Instance and Completion Rewards. He just walked away, not even leaving a cloud behind. Su Chi stretched lazily as he watched the other leave, and surprisingly, he didn't immediately teleport out of the instance. After climbing out of the pit and walking about a kilometer on the street, he saw Tentacle Man standing in the distance, appearing dazed and lost. Su Chi waved his hand. Tentacle Man's eyes widened as he looked at Su Chi, and he ran over with great excitement. "You really did it!" Su Chi looked around the city. "So what's the situation now?" All the completely polluted monsters inside the city have vanished, but a massive amount of pollutants still exist, and others like me, who are not fully polluted abnormal people, should also be alive, Tentacle Man muttered. "But I never thought the terrifying pollution source that has existed for 2 years would be dealt with just like that. I just saw those 3 evil spirits get grabbed by the lava giant hand. Could it be that you are the savior sent to this world? Don't slap labels on me carelessly. And even though it's been dealt with, it's not completely resolved." Su Chi spoke softly. "In these 2 years, this city must have spawned countless pollutants and abnormalities. Other areas have probably fallen as well, losing large tracts of the city." He reached out and pulled out the pocket watch. It was an instance tool and couldn't be placed in the item slot. Since he couldn't take it with him, he might as well leave it to Tentacle Man for self-defense. "The rest is up to you now. I'm about to leave this world." Tentacle Man was startled, his expression becoming solemn as he took the watch seriously. "I understand."
Sui.
"What do you understand?" But he didn't say anything more, as he couldn't stay in the instance for too long. A countdown had already begun. "Goodbye." He waved his hand, his whole figure turning into a shadow and disappearing from the spot. Tentacle Man's gaze turned towards the ravaged city, clutching the pocket watch tightly in his hand, and then he made a certain decision. Player Su Bushin has cleared pollution instance number 2137897. Game difficulty, hard. Game rating, 100. Settling rewards. Awarded perfect level clearance experience and 1,000 game coins, along with 1 lottery chance. Your level has increased to level 7. Awarded 10 points for attribute distribution. Epilogue. Others achieve 100 points through performance, but you, because the maximum is only 100 points. In this world, not only did you perfectly complete the triple line tasks, but you also accomplished content beyond the main mission itself. Whether it's luck, strength, or choices, it's hard to replicate. At the same time, you've left new hope for this half-collapsed world. Perhaps one day, this land will undergo a complete transformation and establish a new order. Luck. Su Chi was not pleased, but upon reflection, there indeed was a stroke of it. It was the sudden appearance of the traveling merchant that enabled Su Chi to obtain something that could pierce the ancient god's heart. Su Chi allocated all his distributable points to physical strength, raising it directly to 35 points. At the same time, his physical strength value also increased to 350 points. Although it seemed enough, in reality, as attributes increased, so would the consumption of physical strength. After all, the energy consumption of a child fighting is different from that of a superhuman in combat. The principle of conservation of energy must still be followed. But that wasn't important. Su Chi stopped focusing on the panel and opened his item slot. He had obtained 2 items this time. One was an old-fashioned speaker and the other was that ancient god's heart. Name: Dead Heart. Type: Quality? Function? Question mark. A question mark also formed on Su Chi's forehead. The panel might as well not be there. But at least there was a note. Note: Mortal, though this heart has died, it still possesses a trace of the ancient god bloodline. Even so, it's not something that you, in your current weak state, can tolerate. So, until you activate it, all you can do is stare post-sale advice from the traveling merchant. Unseal at level 20. Su Chi frowned, annoyed. The note clearly had a personal touch. It seemed it wasn't far off. Su Chi still had one lottery draw left, but he wasn't in a hurry and disconnected, leaving the gaming pod. Lottery draws were quite mystical anyway. He had already won a nice skill today, and according to family tradition, luck refreshed once a day. Saving the draw for tomorrow's game seemed wise. Just as Su Chi was about to head out for a meal, Lu Yishou sent a message. Meet up tomorrow? There are others, and I have important things to discuss. With the intention of understanding the strange world, Su Chi arrived at the agreed location the next day, on time. This hotel could be considered the largest in the city. The space on the first floor was ample enough to play soccer. He noticed, eyeing the elevator entrance crowded with people. And there, the slightly overweight man in the middle, with a question mark over his head, showed. He's strenuously holding in that fart, but he doesn't realize it isn't just a fart. Su Chi decisively abandoned the idea of taking the elevator. The floor wasn't that high anyway. He pushed open the door to the stairwell and found several teenagers sitting on the steps, absorbed in their tablets and playing games noisily. Arg, dead again. This instance's boss is too hard to defeat. There's nothing we can do. We've given it our all. Maybe we should cheat. That's not allowed. I heard cheating kills your whole family. The teenager grit his teeth. I'm an orphan. I'll do it. Su Chi stopped in his tracks, his gaze falling on the game they were playing, which displayed A. And he read the information on it. He bent down and said, cheating isn't recommended. If you just keep hitting this wooden box, you can skip the level. The teens tried it out and it worked. Excitedly, they said, Bro, do you play Primordial Spirit too? I've never played it. They looked puzzled. But how do you know about this Easter egg? I heard about it by chance. The teens' excitement waned, and with indifferent expressions they gave way. Well, there's no point in discussing it then. After all, those who don't play Primordial Spirit lead relatively unsuccessful lives. Su Chi observed them silently, then chuckled wryly. After reaching the floor, he also took the opportunity to report to the hotel staff about the teens blocking the emergency exit and playing an 18-plus game. After asking for the private room's location, Su Chi reached the door, and before he could knock, a weak voice arose from behind him. Are you also invited to the club? Club? Su Chi turned around and saw a girl not exceeding 1.6 meters in height. He knew at a glance that she was extraordinary, not only for her heavy dark circles but also for the hoodie she wore, and judging by the few strands of hair peeking out, they hadn't been washed in at least a week. Her eyes were lackluster, and she was yawning. Yes, Su Chi pondered aloud. A police officer called me over. 2 days of being disturbed is a bit annoying. It's not nice to speak ill of someone behind their back, but I agree with you on that. The hooded girl nodded. Click! The door opened, and Lu Yishou stood at the entrance with a dark expression. At least don't talk about me when I'm present. Su Chi smiled lightly. Well, there's still a door between us, isn't there? He walked in to find Su Lingqiu seated at the head of the table, alongside over 10 other people, looking like an examiner, calmly focusing on the files in her hands. Su Chi took a careful look around. There were all types of professions. He guessed these people must be on the Investigation Bureau's assessment list, apparently gathered here to be notified about something. Now that everyone's arrived, Su Lingqiu was unfazed. She tapped the table lightly and said, As members invited to join the club, let's start by introducing ourselves to one another. Chapter 20, the so-called club. Since Su Chi had walked in, he'd heard the word club 3 times, now reiterated by Su Lingqiu, an official insider, raising his suspicions. At that moment, Lu Yishou winked at Su Chi. Are your eyes dry? Lu Yishou silently took out his phone. What's the matter? Su Chi's phone vibrated slightly, and he checked it. Your situation is a minority. Other players are normal and oblivious to the weird happenings, including our investigation bureau, so we're not intervening officially, but in the form of a club to make offline contact. So that's how it is. Because he'd encountered something weird, Su Chi was contacted by the investigation bureau ahead of time, disclosing a small fraction of the information. The others must have their exceptional traits to be considered by the investigation bureau. At this time, the self-introductions began. Of course, listing everyone's introduction in a group of over 10 people would end this chapter. Let's just mention a few notable ones. A shy-looking young man sitting across from Su Chi, a broadcaster on a gaming platform, rubbed his head sheepishly after being recognized. I'm no gaming god, just enjoy constantly challenging myself. My game ID and platform name are the same, both known as Old Tomato. Sitting to the right of Su Chi was a youth wearing glasses, his eyes deep with calm and wisdom shimmering, speaking succinctly. I hold the speedrun record for escape rooms. My gaming name is Jun Maoan. On the left, a young man in a duckbill cap adjusted the brim, revealing a smirk. Interesting. It seems we're all experts or top contenders in our fields. My name is Night Watch. Before he could finish, someone nearby spoke up with a hint of confusion. Wait, you seem familiar. Are you the adventure god known as Night Watch, who explores abandoned houses and cemeteries at night hunting for the supernatural? The young man in the duckbill cap smiled and nodded. I don't have many strengths, but I've got guts. Finally, it was just the girl in the dress and Su Chi left. Due to extreme tiredness, she just yawned and said, My name is Milk Tea with 70% sugar. I don't excel in any field. Sorry, pulled an all-nighter playing games. The others didn't seem to recognize her. However, Su Linqiu was looking at something in the files, his gaze flickering slightly. Su Chi felt there was something off about the feng shui where he sat. Despite the seating being random, he was the last to introduce. But when it was his turn, he had to say something. Everyone else was a master in their respective fields. Gaming nickname, Su Buxian. Su Chi started. I'm good at playing instruments and singing. My achievements aren't too few or too many. Just last half year, I won the local shuttlecock competition and during my stint as a community service volunteer, successfully solved a neighborhood adultery case. Uncle Wong cheated on Uncle Lee. Then 2 months ago, people paused. His resume was extensive but seemed disconnected. Lu Yishou, who knew the scoop on Su Chi, couldn't help but widen his eyes. What the hell are you talking about? And that sounded indeed like reality. You've been slacking up till now. Huh. This concludes my self-introduction, Su Chi said modestly. Thank you, everyone. Old Tomato scratched his face, looking around at the silent crowd, and offered a sympathetic chuckle. Brother Su's resume seems quite extensive indeed. Forcing praise only makes things weirder, my friend. Night Watch laughed. But you're not wrong. Brother Su, true to his name, really can't sit still. No trouble at all, Su Chi responded with a light-hearted smile. No trouble my ass. Lu Yishou sighed. He almost couldn't resist pulling out a cigarette from his pocket. This guy had just taken down a murderer a few days ago, far more ruthless than these so-called masters of various domains. Su Linqiu didn't respond. Although he wanted to make a comment while Su Chi was speaking, he wasn't here today to represent the official stance. He was merely the president of a gaming club. He gently tapped on the table. Everyone has introduced themselves. Those capable of being here today all have their strengths. Thank you for accepting the invitation to join my club and I hope, in the game Abyssal Paradise, you can find what you're looking for. After saying those meaningful words, Su Linqiu paused. As president and also an internal tester in the game, if any of you have questions, I'll provide answers as best I can, and each official club member will receive a piece of equipment issued by the club. Equipment? What quality? Some faces showed visible emotion. Ordinary quality, with a specific attribute or ability that should be of great help to you right now. Ordinary quality? Most people showed an excited, surprised expression. clearly understanding the potential of this game and just how valuable the equipment was. Su Chi was stunned. Why was everyone so excited? Was he the only one who didn't know the value of the equipment? It made sense. He seldom read forums, nor had he actively searched for any game strategies. His main approach was to skip to play first and ask questions later. Nothing much of importance followed. Everyone ordered food and enjoyed a joyful, offline meet and eat. The masters earlier had naturally attracted others to initiate conversations with them. The renowned and the unknowns were treated differently, as was the case everywhere. At this moment, Su Chi was quite comfortable eating, while he took out his phone and logged into the official forum. Although the open beta had just started yesterday, the forum was already bursting with discussions. Many who played felt the game was extraordinary, unmatched in immersion and realism by any other game in the market, continuously sharing their experiences. Of course, there were also those showing off their scores, with new players rarely scoring above 80 even on ordinary difficulty. And many posts read, "Buying equipment and skills at high prices, PM to discuss." Su Chi scrolled through. Many savvy big-time players or wealthy gamers had seen the potential in this game, constantly buying up various items, equipment, skills, even game coins at high prices, as the game had yet to implement a recharge and trading system, forcing many cash players to spend real money. An ordinary quality piece of equipment could sell for tens of thousands of yuan. This made Su Chi think of his evil god's eye and ancient god's heart. Both items were extraordinary and beyond valuation, especially since the former should not be discussed with outsiders. And the means of transaction currently is through DuoQ to exchange items within game instances, right? Su Chi seemed to smell hints of underhand dealings. But that wasn't any of his concern. At the same time, Su Chi realized why these people were so ecstatic. An ordinary quality piece of equipment, worth tens of thousands of yuan, just for becoming an official club member. It was a complete steal for them. Just then, his phone buzzed with a message from Lu Yishou. Why the ambiguity? Why a message when he's so close? Lu Yishou. You've seen it, most here are on the assessment list, gathered together to meet each other, and besides you, there are others who've experienced strange occurrences. Don't you want to know who the other person who encountered something strange is? Su Chi looked at the messages popping up on his phone and replied, "Although you're beating around the bush, I've known it since I walked in the door." Lu Yishou was slightly taken aback. Su Chi had already turned his gaze to the girl who had fallen asleep at the table next to him. "Those who don't know your identities wouldn't acknowledge when I mention the word police officers.